I always thought curiosity was harmless. I mean, isn't it what pushes us to learn, to explore, to grow? But sometimes, curiosity opens doors that should have stayed locked. For me, it wasn't just a door. It was a trapdoor straight into darkness. I didn't realize that night, as I typed my parents' names into the search bar on the dark web, that I was digging my own grave. That was the moment I uncovered something I'll never escape. The videos I found weren't just disturbing. They were unspeakable. Each second dragged me deeper into a suffocating darkness. A nightmare I couldn't wake up from. And at the center of it all, my parents, their faces a mask of cold detachment, their every movement calculated and unfeeling. It was as though the people I had loved, the ones who had raised me, had been replaced by something monstrous, something inhuman. My parents always told me to stay away from the dark web, to stick to what was safe. But what if the people warning you are the ones hiding something? What if the danger isn't out there but right here in your own home? Growing up, my parents were overly cautious. They locked every door, triple-checked the windows, and always seemed to be on edge. When I was 14, they packed us up and moved across the country with almost no warning. Their reason? A string of murders in our old neighborhood. At the time, I thought it was overkill, moving just because some crimes happened nearby. But now, looking back, I see it for what it was, running from something they didn't want me to know. Adjusting to a new school was rough. I didn't know anyone, and for a while I was just the weird new kid. Then I met Alex. Alex was different, reserved, almost secretive, but brilliant. We clicked instantly. He introduced me to the world of coding and hacking, and before long we were inseparable. But there was one thing Alex loved more than anything else. The dark web. To him, it was a puzzle to solve, a treasure trove of hidden knowledge. I joined him a few times exploring forums and strange websites, but I never went as deep as he did. Alex wasn't afraid of what he might find. I wish I could say the same. One morning, I woke up to a string of frantic texts from Alex. This wasn't like him. He was calm, methodical, never panicked. Something was wrong. When I got to his house, it was chaos. Cops everywhere, reporters shouting questions, neighbors whispering on their lawns. I pushed my way through the crowd, heart pounding. Alex was missing. His mom was inconsolable. She kept asking me if I knew anything, if Alex had said something to me. I didn't have answers, but I felt like I should have. I should have seen this coming. The room was just as he'd left it, except for his computer. The screen was on, tabs scattered across the browser. I sat down, hoping for a clue. Instead, I found a nightmare. At first, it was just news articles. Stories about brutal murders, graphic photos. It was disturbing, but I didn't understand the connection. Then I saw it, a story about a woman killed 2 years ago. She was our neighbor, the one from before we moved. It didn't make sense. Why would Alex care about this? Why would he be looking into something from my past? And then I saw the last tab. It was a search bar, and the search? My last name. I couldn't shake the feeling that Alex was trying to tell me something. I opened my laptop, fired up the Tor browser, and typed my last name into the search bar. At first, nothing happened. Then the page loaded. It was a video archive. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Each one tagged with a name. Victims. My chest tightened as I clicked on the first video. It was her. Our old neighbor. She was terrified, struggling against the ropes. And then my parents stepped into frame. My dad was holding a knife, my mom a scalpel. They didn't hesitate. They didn't even flinch. Each video was worse than the last. My parents, calm and methodical, committing murder after murder. I felt sick. And then I saw it, a new upload, from today. I didn't want to watch, but I couldn't stop myself. My parents stepped into frame. My dad pulled the sack off, and I saw his face. It was Alex. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My best friend was sitting in that chair, and my parents were going to kill him. I couldn't think straight. My hands were shaking, my breathing uneven. Every nerve in my body screamed to shut the laptop and pretend this wasn't happening, but I couldn't. I couldn't leave Alex. I didn't know what to do. The police? They wouldn't believe me. My parents? They were the danger. And Alex? I didn't even know if he was still alive. I thought I knew my family. I thought I was safe. But the truth? The truth is something I'll never outrun. Every memory of my parents played in my head like a broken film reel. Birthday parties, family dinners, quiet moments watching TV. None of it made sense anymore. Who were these people? How long had they been hiding this? The dark web took Alex. It revealed my parents. And now, it's coming for me. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number lit up the screen. I almost didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. The message was short, but it hit me like a freight train. "You're next." My blood turned cold. I didn't even realize I'd dropped my phone until I heard it hit the floor. My hands were trembling, sweat pouring down my face. The walls of my room felt like they were closing in on me. I grabbed my laptop again, desperate to find something, anything that could explain what was happening. I scoured the videos, each one worse than the last. My parents' faces were calm, detached, like they were performing some routine chore. It was horrifying. Then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. In the background of every video, there was a symbol etched into the wall, a circle with jagged lines cutting through it. It looked almost ancient, like some kind of ritual marking. What did it mean? Was this more than just murder? Was there something deeper, darker at play? My head was spinning with questions, none of which I had answers to. I tried to piece it together, but the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. My parents' faces haunted me, the cold precision in their movements, the way they never hesitated. This wasn't just crime. This was something else entirely. I stared at the latest video. Alex's terrified face burned into my mind. His eyes pleaded for help, but there was nothing I could do. Not yet. I had to think. I had to figure out how to stop this without getting myself killed. My phone buzzed again. Another message. "They're watching." I jumped out of my chair, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked around my room, every shadow suddenly feeling like a pair of eyes staring back at me. I closed my laptop, pulled the curtains shut, and locked the door. But it didn't feel like enough. The walls seemed thinner, the darkness heavier. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like a rat trapped in a cage. Every sound made me flinch. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the air conditioner, everything felt like a threat. I sat in the corner of my room, knees pulled to my chest, staring at the door. I didn't know how long I stayed like that, but it felt like hours. Maybe it was. Time didn't feel real anymore. All I knew was fear. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I fell into a restless sleep. My dreams were filled with shadows, whispers, and the symbol from the videos. When I woke up, it was dark outside. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Midnight. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't ready. It all began on a quiet evening. Bored and aimlessly browsing the dark web, I stumbled upon a directory of links. Most led to dead forums or obscure private sites, but one link stood out. All-American Extreme Games. Curious, I clicked. My screen lit up with the image of a tall man in an eagle mask, flanked by a waving American flag. Beneath it, bold text read, "Welcome to the extreme games, where childhood memories turn deadly." Scrolling through the site, I discovered videos of games I remembered from childhood. Red Light, Green Light, Simon Says, and my personal favorite, Hide and Seek. But these were no ordinary games. In one video, contestants hunted each other across a sprawling industrial complex. In another, players desperately sprinted through city streets to evade capture. It was thrilling and terrifying. The vivid thumbnails showed more than just games. They showcased desperation. Adults who looked like they hadn't slept in days, darting into shadows, hiding behind dumpsters and crawling through tight spaces. Yet, the excitement of reliving my childhood favorite, Hide and Seek, tugged at me. There was a visceral allure in the chaos and the thrill. My hands trembled with anticipation, and a grin tugged at the corners of my lips. I told myself it was harmless fun, a chance to shake up the monotony of life. But beneath the surface of my enthusiasm was a faint, uneasy tug. A pop-up interrupted my browsing. Think you have what it takes? Join the next game of hide and seek and win a life-changing grand prize. My heart raced. The prize, an astronomical sum, was tempting. Without much thought, I clicked Apply Now. A brief form appeared, asking for basic details. Below it were 5 simple rules. Hiders must be brought in alive and not incapacitated. Hiders must not kill or incapacitate hunters. No players may leave city boundaries. This will be enforced. Turning off your phone/location forfeits the game. Once you're in, you're in. No backing out. Excitement trumped caution. I filled out the form, ignoring the little voice in my head warning me of the risks. Moments later, a confirmation screen appeared. "Right on, you got this. We'll contact you soon." I stared at the screen, half ecstatic and half dreading what I'd just committed to. My stomach churned, a peculiar blend of exhilaration and apprehension. The next day passed uneventfully. By afternoon, I had convinced myself I hadn't been selected. Then, at 3 p.m., my phone buzzed. The email's subject line read, "Game on." I'd been chosen. The email listed the game's participants: 25 hunters and 25 hiders, including myself. My team's photos appeared on the screen, strangers of varying ages. Beneath them were the hunters, intimidating figures who looked capable of anything. The email ended ominously. "Good luck, don't get caught." Despite my initial thrill, dread crept in. The rules were clear. There was no turning back. My chest tightened and my palms grew slick with sweat as I reread the email. I had to think fast. I left work early, feigning illness, and drove to a busy mall. I figured blending into the crowd would buy me time. My mind raced with potential plans. What if a hunter found me in public? Could I outrun them, or would my fear give me away? But my escape was cut short. At a red light, I heard screeching tires. A black pickup truck slammed into my car, sending it spinning. The force of the collision knocked the air from my lungs. For a moment, the world blurred into a cacophony of screeching metal, shattering glass, and the acrid stench of burning rubber. Dazed, I looked up to see the driver, a hunter. Panic set in as he wrestled with his jammed seatbelt, his eyes locked on me with predatory intent. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as the reality of the game sunk in. The world spun. The acrid smell of burnt rubber filled my lungs as I fumbled with the door. My trembling hands struggled to find the handle, and every second felt like an eternity. I forced myself out through the shattered windshield, my ribs screaming in protest. Pain lanced through my side with every breath, but fear drove me forward. The hunter, now free, gave chase. I darted across a busy street, narrowly avoiding speeding cars. The blare of horns and screech of brakes faded into the background as adrenaline took over. Behind me, the hunter ignored the traffic, causing a massive pileup. The chaos bought me precious seconds. I reached the mall and slipped inside, blending into the throng of shoppers. Inside the mall, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow felt sinister. Every passerby a potential hunter. My chest heaved as I pretended to browse a clothing store, my eyes darting nervously around the space. A bead of sweat trickled down my temple. Then, a familiar face appeared. Jenny, another hider. Her eyes were wide with terror, her movements frantic as she glanced over her shoulder. I approached, cautiously, whispering, "Jenny, it's me. David. We're on the same team." Relief washed over her face, but it was fleeting. "They're insane," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I saw one. He's here." Her words sent a chill down my spine. My throat tightened as I scanned the store, half expecting a hunter to burst from the racks at any moment. We agreed to team up, hoping numbers would improve our odds. But no sooner had we made our pact than a hunter appeared, a towering figure scanning the store. He spotted us instantly. His lips curled into a cruel smile, and the hunt began. "Run!" I shouted. We bolted, weaving through racks of clothes. My legs burned with the effort, but I pushed forward, my mind screaming one command: survive. The hunter pursued, his steps thunderous. Jenny and I split up, each drawing his attention in turns. Every step reverberated through my mind, a countdown to capture or survival. The chase spilled into the food court. Desperation fueled me as I toppled chairs and tables in the hunter's path. Jenny wasn't as lucky. She tripped, and the hunter closed in, dragging her toward the exit. My breath hitched. Helping her meant risking my own capture. My pulse pounded as indecision gripped me, but I couldn't leave her. Grabbing a metal tray, I charged, slamming it into the hunter's back. He released Jenny with a snarl, his eyes blazing with rage. My heart raced as we fled together, making it to the parking lot. A second hunter emerged from the shadows, boxing us in. My chest tightened with despair. It seemed hopeless. Then, out of nowhere, a car screeched into the lot, its driver yelling, "Get in!" It was another hider. We dove into the back seat and the car sped off. The hunters gave chase in their pickup, but our driver expertly lost them in the labyrinth of city streets. Safe, for now, we caught our breath and exchanged names. Our rescuer, Marcus, had been tracking other hiders to form an alliance. Together, we devised a plan: stick together, stay mobile, and avoid the hunters at all costs. For the next few days, we moved from place to place, dodging hunters and evading capture. We relied on Marcus's street smarts, Jenny's quick thinking, and my ability to stay calm under pressure. But the hunters were relentless. Each encounter left us more shaken, more desperate. Sleep became a luxury, and every noise felt like the prelude to an attack. My nerves were frayed, my mind teetering on the edge of exhaustion. One night, while hiding in an abandoned warehouse, Marcus revealed a grim theory. The hunters weren't just playing for points. They enjoyed the chase and the pain they inflicted. It wasn't just a game to them. That revelation fueled our determination to survive. We set traps, used distractions, and outsmarted our pursuers at every turn. But the toll was heavy. By the end of the first week, half our team had been captured. We were running out of options. My stomach twisted with guilt every time I thought of those we couldn't save. Every passing moment became a test of endurance, a desperate gamble of survival instincts over overwhelming odds. Fear and hope warred within me. each vying for control. I clung to hope, the fragile thread that kept me moving forward. On the final day, we received a message. Final round. Survive until midnight. The remaining hiders gathered in a dense forest on the city's outskirts. The hunters closed in, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. My breaths came in shallow gasps as I crouched behind a thick tree trunk. One by one, we were separated. I found myself alone, hiding in a hollowed-out tree. The minutes felt like hours as the hunters searched relentlessly. My muscles ached from staying still, and my mind raced with every worst-case scenario. Just when I thought I'd made it, a beam of light swept over me. A hunter's voice growled, "Found you." Heart pounding, I bolted into the night, branches clawing at my skin. Ahead, the city lights beckoned. If I could just reach them, I'd be safe. But as I broke through the tree line, a sharp pain shot through my leg. I collapsed, turning to see a hunter looming over me. Before he could grab me, a deafening siren wailed. Midnight. The game was over. The hunter stepped back, his expression unreadable. He disappeared into the shadows, leaving me battered but alive. As I lay there, gasping for breath, my phone buzzed. A new message. "Congratulations, you survived. Your prize will be delivered soon." But there was no relief, only dread. I'd won the game, but at what cost? And what dark forces had orchestrated this nightmare? As the city lights blurred around me, one thought consumed me. I'd escaped the game, but I'd never escape the memories. It started as a joke, a half-drunken idea tossed around between friends during one of our late-night gaming sessions. What's the worst that could happen? Pete had laughed, nudging me with his elbow. We had heard the stories, the urban legends of the dark web and its mystery boxes. People claimed they had received everything from creepy dolls to bloodied clothes, but we never believed it. It was just a game, right? I don't know why I did it. Maybe curiosity, maybe boredom, maybe just plain stupidity. But for my birthday, I bought myself something different. A dark web mystery box. It wasn't my first time. Usually, it was just a fun gamble. Random junk, weird trinkets, maybe something creepy but harmless. But this one wasn't like the others. There was a note inside. Simple, short, but something about it set my nerves on edge. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the paper, my breath catching in my throat as my eyes scanned the words. There comes a time in every man's life when his skills and knowledge must be tested. Follow the instructions inside the box. For your safety, burn every letter after reading. Pete. Pete. My best friend since childhood. We grew up together, trusted each other with everything, but how the hell was he involved in this? My heart pounded against my ribs as a strange sense of unease crawled up my spine. The room around me suddenly felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in, suffocating me with an invisible weight. I burned the note, just like it said. The flames danced hungrily, curling the paper into blackened embers. The heat should have felt comforting, but instead it sent a chill through me. Maybe Pete had found the site, decided to mess with me. It had to be a joke, right? But my instincts screamed otherwise. My gut twisted with an unshakable sense of dread. Inside the box, there was a single clue. 2 words scrawled in messy handwriting. Van Mace. It made no damn sense. My fingers traced the letters over and over, my mind whirring with possibilities. And then it hit me. It was an anagram man cave. Pete's basement, our old spot. The place we wasted weekends, drinking, gaming, talking about life. I should have been excited. But something about this felt wrong. It was as if something was watching me, lurking just beyond the edges of my vision. The air felt heavy, dense with something unseen. My own breath sounded too loud, too deliberate. The basement was empty. No Pete, no party, just another clue pinned to the wall with a knife. The sight of the blade sent a ripple of discomfort through me, my stomach knotting as I hesitantly pulled it free. The blade was cold, almost unnaturally so, as if it had been sitting in a freezer moments before. My fingers shook as I turned it over, my reflection distorted in the metal. A playing card, ace of spades, and a photo, a place we used to go, a field outside the city. No note, no instructions, just another step in the game, I muttered under my breath, trying to steady my thoughts. What the hell is going on, Pete? My voice felt too loud in the silent basement, as if the walls themselves were listening. The shadows seemed to shift in the corners of my eyes, but every time I turned, there was nothing. It took an hour to get there. The drive was eerily silent. No music, no calls, just the low hum of the engine and my own erratic breathing. The field was quiet. Too quiet. The air was still, heavy with something unspoken. And right in the middle, a shovel, sticking out of a patch of fresh dirt. My fingers hovered over the handle, my pulse pounding. "All right," I whispered. "What's the next step?" I felt ridiculous talking to myself, but the silence pressed in on me, unbearable. I gripped the shovel, my fingers tightening around the wooden handle. It felt wrong, like something was urging me to stop. Ace of spades, a shovel. I knew what it meant. I expected another note, maybe a buried box, another puzzle. But as I dug, I hit something solid. The sound sent a shiver up my spine, my pulse hammering against my skull. I hesitated. My hands shook as I brushed the dirt away, revealing something pale beneath the soil. Cold skin. Fabric. My breath hitched, my entire body locking up. I knew before I saw him, but when I did, Pete. A strangled sound left my throat, something between a gasp and a sob. No. No, no, no. My hands shook violently as I reached forward, barely able to process what I was seeing. My stomach churned, bile rising in my throat as the reality of the situation settled in. The air around me seemed to constrict, pressing in on me from all sides. The world around me suddenly felt like a nightmare. The sky, once a dull gray, seemed darker, like the heavens themselves recoiled from the scene. The trees swayed, whispering something inaudible, their twisted branches reaching toward me like skeletal fingers. The dirt beneath my knees felt wet, almost sticky, clinging to my skin like the ground itself was trying to pull me under. A distant rustling sent a jolt through me. My head snapped up, eyes darting wildly. Was someone watching? My skin crawled with the feeling of unseen eyes lingering just beyond the trees. The shadows between the trunks seemed darker, deeper, as if something hid within them, waiting. The wind picked up, carrying with it a whisper, a sound so faint it almost felt like it was inside my head. A breath against my ear. Run. The whisper wasn't just a sound. It carried weight, as though something unseen was pressing against me, its icy breath licking at my neck. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest as I tripped over roots and stumbled through the overgrown field. Every breath felt heavier, each step slower, as though the ground itself was pulling me back. I glanced over my shoulder and saw it, a figure, tall, gaunt. Its face stretched into something unnatural, an endless grin that sent ice through my veins. The shadows clung to it, bending unnaturally as it moved. It wasn't running. It didn't need to. I felt the weight of every decision I had made leading up to this. The regret was suffocating. How had it come to this? My mind reeled, flashing through every wrong turn, every stupid impulse that led me to open that damn box. If only I had ignored it. If only I had let it sit, unopened. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy, shaking so badly I could barely unlock the screen. Come on, come on! The dial tone seemed deafening. 911, what's your emergency? My voice cracked. I swallowed hard, forcing the words out. There's been a murder. My friend, someone killed him. A scream ripped through the air, high and inhuman. My vision blurred as panic took hold, my feet slipping in the damp earth. Something grabbed my wrist, cold, wet, unyielding. I tried to scream, but the wind swallowed the sound. The last thing I saw before everything went black was Pete's lifeless eyes staring up at me from the ground, his mouth moving, whispering a final warning. You shouldn't have played the game. The darkness swallowed me whole. And then I woke up. Not in my room, not in my car, but back at the beginning. The box was on my desk, the note inside, waiting, and Pete's voice whispering in my ear. Round 2 begins. I wish I'd never watched that video. I thought I'd grow out of shit like that by the time I'd hit 20. Yet, there I was, off my tits on some choice MDMA Jeff hooked us up with, touring through some kind of hardcore sadomasochism site. The kind of videos you're surprised aren't on the dark web. If you ever stumbled across the Pain Olympics or 4chan, you'll know what I'm talking about. When I was a teenager, mates and I would gather round a PC screen, playing chicken to see who could watch the most extreme content without leaving the room or puking. This was like that, but with a tablet and nobody is sober. In my defense, it wasn't my idea. Luke's cousin was down for the weekend. Young lad, about 16, I think. Not too bright, but kept himself to himself, which meant he wasn't going to get us caught sneaking him into the rave underage. As usual, afterwards we found ourselves at a flat party, and then in Luke's bedroom. It wasn't until about 4 a.m., when those who were able had sauntered off to get laid, that the usual rounds of spliff and internet began. This was when Luke's cousin started suggesting weirder and weirder shit. We all thought at first that it was just the Mandy. He was young after all, and teenage desire to be seen as edgy mixed with come-down anxiety was a plausible explanation. After a while, though, one of us started to entertain his suggestions. Everybody there enjoyed horror films after all. We'd had more than one 4 a.m. Saw or Hostel marathon after a night out. What was the harm? Soon enough, we found ourselves in the familiar group cringe and, out loud, "Oh, huzz." There was then, of course, the unending debate over whatever macabre footage we'd just put ourselves through was real. We dug to the point of a woman using a kitchen knife to scalp herself, and a man pulling his own toes off with a pair of pliers, when we found it. Luke's cousin was in control by that point. We hadn't noticed how quiet he'd gotten. He sat there on the floor, legs crossed, leaning forward every so often to click the next video. Had this look on his face the whole time, like he was searching for something specific. He never skipped anything, though. No matter what the video showed, he just sat back, watching whatever it was making the rest of us make melodramatic, retching noises unfold. Once one video finished, he scoured the algorithm's suggestions for the next. He'd ignored all of ours by this point, so we'd stopped bothering. We were more than a few blunts into our session, and holding our focus on anything other than the rich conversation about which of the girls we knew would be a good smash was difficult. I remember him sighing disappointedly at every video he found, except for the last. When he found that one, he licked his lips, rocking slightly. He must have known. No way the creepy little folk found it by accident. When he clicked play, we all knew this one was going to be different. I'm not sure how. Call, if instinct. Something was off about it, which, when you consider the kind of website we were surfing, said a lot. Before the footage started, the rest of us had been laughing and joking in a blunt, smoked haze. The vibe of the room switched in less than a heartbeat. The moment sound started to seep from the tinny speaker, every chemically stimulated mind enraptured by the figure on the 12-inch tablet screen. It was a girl, younger than us, but older than Luke's cousin. Pretty, but not in the conventional sense. I say pretty because she wasn't exactly hot. Not the kind of looks you try and buy a drink. She had a pleasantness to the eye that I can't really put in words. To describe her would make her sound plain, almost ugly. Drooping cheeks, large eyes surrounded by makeup done a little too much, lipstick ever so just the wrong shade of red, hair that had been brushed but was in obvious need of a wash. Not the sort of girl I'd give a second or third look under any other circumstance. In that smoky room, she was all I could think about. The first 2 minutes of footage were her staring at the camera in front of a gray wall. The shot was well lit and the camera was expensive. All the lines and imperfections of her face were visible. Her mic was clearly pricey too. When she finally parted her lips, the sound of them peeling apart was quite audible. The breaths between her words came through as though she were in the room with us. She talked for a whole 5 minutes before anything interesting happened. I don't know when the lads had last focused on something for that long at that time in the morning. Maybe never. Luke, Hunt, Jack, Lyle, and I all sat on the mattress in beanbags, hypnotized by the movement of her puffed lips, whispering semi-nonsense at us. She spoke a lot about necessity and excess, about evolution and optimization, deconstruction and renewal, subjects that didn't really seem to be linked to me at the time. It goes without saying I understand it all now, but then it just came across as meaningless word salad. It didn't matter. I would have listened to that face read even something as dull as the Bible for 500 years if given the chance. She said her last words and held up a potato peeler. I didn't think much of it. I was too lost in those dark eyes of hers. She asked us all to remember that everything we do is to achieve perfection. Something like that, at least. The exact phrasing doesn't matter. It's the idea that counts. Perfection. The room jumped in unison when the footage cut to black. The switch was accompanied with a loud crash, the sound of something heavy landing on the lowest notes of a grand piano. "You can try this at home." The words appeared letter by letter in a white typewriter font. Sporadic detuned piano notes played over the scrolling text, along with muffled grunts and the scraping bangs of God knows what being dragged across a floor. The hair on my arms stood on end. I wasn't grinning and laughing anymore. I was still high, but barely. From the quick glances I exchanged with the rest of the lads, I could tell they were in a similar state. Everybody except Luke's cousin, of course. He didn't look away from the screen, his eyes bulging, left one slipping into a slight twitch every time a new character of the message appeared. I happened to be watching him when the next scene started. The look of excitement disgusted me almost as much as the footage that inspired it. The camera had been moved about 10 feet away from the woman. For some reason, this didn't affect the definition of her face. The wrinkles of her top lip, the poorly concealed spot on her nostril, the blobs left over from over-generous application of eyeliner and mascara. All were just as clear as when she had been a few inches from the screen. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her drooping cheeks were slick with tears, and they wobbled in time with the trembling of her jaw. Her large eyes stared into the camera, into us, pleading for help. Both sides of the screen knew wasn't coming. She was still holding the potato peeler next to her head. Unlike her bottom lip, her grip was steady. We could see her clothes now, too. She was wearing a skirted suit, and an expensive one at that. My plan for after uni was to go into banking. I'm versed enough in tailoring to recognize quality fabric when I see it. The sobbing woman had on the uniform of the financially successful. The men stood either side of her were naked. They were each a few feet taller than her. An impressive feat, since even though she was sat down, you could tell the woman was tall. The length of her slender legs was a testament to this. The naked men were wider than her too, by a considerable margin. To say the sweating figures were morbidly obese would be an understatement. How their stubby legs supported their weight was a mystery to me. The hanging belly flab almost touched the floor. Their skin shone with grease, sweat, and dirt, and were it not for the fact I knew it's impossible, I would have sworn under oath that I could smell the pungent odor of curdled milk whenever I looked at either of them for too long. The one to her left was holding a transparent bucket, filled with a clear liquid that I hoped was water. To her right was a silver tray. I can't comment on what the men looked like. I couldn't see their faces through the orange shopping bags over their heads. The cheap plastic was fastened in place with about a half-dozen zip ties round each man's neck. The crinkled skin pulled so taut that the shapes of their faces were visible. A pair of orange-bound skulls on the peaks of twin mountains of glistening flesh. The only movement from either was the steady in-out of the bag being pushed and pulled by labored breaths. Excess is the enemy of achievement. There was another piano crash. The letters didn't scroll out one by one this time, but appeared as a single block. They only hanged around for about half a second before the video took us back to the dusty floorboards, gray wall, sobbing girl, and her hulking guardians. Except she wasn't sobbing anymore. She wasn't smiling either. Even though her gaze was directly into the camera, her expression was blank. Still laced with an unexplainable magnetism, but the perk and spark from the segment where she spoke to us was gone. She raised the potato peeler in front of her face. Before I knew what was happening, she dragged the blade down in a single, uninterrupted motion. She didn't wince, didn't flinch, didn't register in any way the sharp metal slicing through the bridge of her nose. The removed flesh rolled itself into a damp curl as she peeled. It fell to the ground with a wet splat that was far too loud for comfort. Scarlet gushes joined the streaks of dark makeup her earlier tears had dislodged. Pale bone was visible in the wound. The button tip of her nose hung on a thread from where the peeler had found its way too deep, and she had to yank it out. The blood pooled at the dangling chunk, dripping on her expensive skirt. She didn't even blink. Someone threw up. I could smell it, although the sounds of the hurling felt like they came from some other world. I was lost in the woman on the screen. I couldn't look away, and I didn't mean that my curiosity got the better of me. I was actively trying, putting so much strain into turning my head that veins on my neck began to bulge. My eyes throbbed. The tiny muscles used to move them left and right screamed, threatening to tear from the force I put on them. Didn't work. I was helpless, sat on the dirty carpet unable to stop watching as she dragged and dragged the gleaming metal. On occasion, the blade would get clogged. When this happened, she would reach into the bucket, whisking the utensil around to remove the debris. Clouds of red bloomed in the water. The whole time, her expression stayed unresponsive to the curls of skin piling up on the floor, the crimson wetness that consumed the lower half of her face, the open holes where her nostrils used to be. She should have screamed, but didn't. Part of me knew it was more accurate to say she couldn't. That part of me was the one that wanted to scream too. I was paralyzed and terrified. No matter how much strength of will I mustered, I couldn't turn my head away from the screen. Couldn't shut my eyes. Couldn't focus on anything other than the scraping of the peeler. Adrenaline and panic took over my mind. My body seemed to be getting different messages from the girl shearing off her own nose slice by slice. To my absolute disgust, I had, pitched a tent. I had never felt uglier, more repulsive in my life. I'm not a psycho or a pervert. I'm not. All I wanted to do was not watch. The footage must have tapped into something deep, some latent human infatuation with violence in all of us. That's the only explanation, surely. It's not like a video could hijack your body. Ah, beauty, such minimalism. The piano crash was louder this time, closer to the microphone. Again, the words only last about half a second. When the trio returned, the small nub of exposed bone was gone. A triangle of open flesh lay at the center of the woman's face, her nose now in wet spirals on her lap and around her feet. The cheeks were next. It was around the time that teeth started to be exposed that I hurled. The entrapment was so strong by this point I could no longer steal quick glances at the boys, but I could hear many of them doing the same. It was a struggle getting the vomit out. I couldn't bend over far enough due to the paralysis, and had to cough it out mouthful by burning mouthful. One of them was laying on their back when the video started. I could tell by the gargled crying that it was Hunt. I felt a tear fall down my cheek, unable to look away from the woman peeling her lower jaw down to the bone as the wails behind me coughed into drowned silence. Somebody managed to get out an almost inaudible whimper. Even though my vision was blurred with tears, I could still make out the half-skeleton in the video. I watched the screen, spitting up the occasional chunk of regurgitated kebab meat as the blurred figure reached to her right. The woman took two objects from the silver tray that I couldn't quite make out. The orange-headed blob next to her didn't move, but even through the watery haze, I could still just about make out the steady rhythm of its breath beneath the bag. For the first time in my life, I was happy to be crying. The weakness in character put up a partial shield, blurring and censoring whatever I was about to see once the woman had positioned the objects next to her dripping half-face. "You will watch!" The crashing came from behind, the unseen pianist slamming on the keys only a few feet away. Something forced me to blink, and I mean that in a very literal sense. It wasn't voluntary, it wasn't a reflex, it was done on command. A command from who or what, I didn't know. My eyes slammed shut and were quickly wrenched open again by an indescribable and overbearing impulse. All traces of tears were gone. The video swam back into focus just in time to catch the downward swing of the hammer. Exposed jawbone swung outwards, the chisel following through and digging itself in the underside of the lolling tongue. The limp muscle fell to her throat with a wet slap, hanging there behind the dangling jaw for all to see. The girl was calm when she placed the tools in her lap and reached up for the partially detached bone. Her expression didn't change when she tweaked it loose, discarding her own jaw on the floor with the skin peelings as though she had just picked a scab. On top of everything else, the stiffness in my jeans hadn't subsided. Were my stomach not empty, I would have vomited again, as much from self-disgust as the nightmare Luke's cousin had pulled me into. See what she gives for you. She removes all but the most necessary features. The unseen pianist was closer now, but what concentration I still had was focused on Luke's cousin. I could just about see him out of the corner of my eye. He was blinking. I noticed that straight away because I couldn't unless ordered to. Laying on the floor, less than 10 inches from the screen, his young face was illuminated a ghostly blue by the light from the tablet. I couldn't pull my attention on him much, the video wouldn't allow it, but I could have sworn he managed to shoot the occasional gleeful glance at the rest of us. I was able to notice him enough to see how his wide grin didn't falter, how the joy in his adolescent eyes didn't fade as the woman on screen reached towards her own with the steel ice cream scoop. My own eyes burned with each steady flick of the woman's wrists. My eyelids howled at me, fighting a losing war to close themselves, trying, even though it was hopeless, to shield my mind from the sight of those bloodied, once white orbs plopping to the ground. I had to cough down empty heaves when the second one rolled towards the camera, the fading pupil locked on my own. It was judging me, and I knew why. The reason I nearly choked on my own vomit wasn't just because of the footage, though. The disgust was far more at my own body than at anything the video forced me to watch the girl do to hers. I could feel the wetness in my boxers the moment that first eye squelched on the floorboards. Every spasm haunted me, every muscular convulsion scarring me for life. Outside of the nightmare, before it, I had earned the half-joking nickname of Big Shagger on campus. I'd never hated myself for it before now. It wasn't until the girl started removing the skin of her brow like a face mask that the twitching stopped. My brain must have worked out that shutting my eyes wasn't going to happen. My extremities went numb. The heavy knot in my stomach became a rising lightness, an unpleasant floating sensation that nights of being blackout drunk had left me all too familiar with. The room spinned one way, my insides another. The space behind my eyes prickled. I could feel myself slipping into a blissful unconsciousness. I urged the process on. I was desperate to be out of the nightmare. And if passing out was the only way, then so be it. The hand had other ideas. She obliges, she obeys, she complies. This is all for you. I could feel the clammy grip on the back of my head. The fingers worked their way through my hair, pulling and tugging to make sure I had no respite from my own depraved nature. Every time my head lulled forwards, it would be wrenched back. The fog of unconsciousness fanned away again and again. I could hear sobs and whimpers from every direction that is except where Luke's cousin sat. I could feel his grin, the cracks of his laughter flecking my wet face, the hanging smoke in the air, that stodgy scent of cheap weed and even cheaper cigarettes grew thicker by the second. It snaked through my mouth and nostrils, coating the inside of my lungs with heavy phlegm that left my breathing like that of a drowning man. I gagged for a final time, blood and bile spewing onto the already vomit-sodden carpet. Perfection. The crashing in my ear canal timed itself perfectly with the moment the woman grasped her own hair and pulled. The scalp came clean off, the fluid motion leaving a glistening skull caked in chunks of red and purple. The text came just as my brain had time to process the final masterpiece. The girl stood tall, proud even, with the two sweating mountains of fat either side of her, the plastic of the bags on their heads still moving with that slow in-out rhythm. The floorboards they stood on were awash with blood, a pile of fleshy curls at the woman's high heels, a single eye staring at the camera on top of it. Perfection. The word sliced through the crystal image. To my shock and self-hatred, I was wincing from the sudden removal of the eyeless stare, the tongue lolling free on a jawless neck. My head swam, joints ached, eyes burned. Yet, through the taste of vomit and heaving of raw lungs, only one thought crossed my mind. Perfection. As soon as I could move, I didn't hesitate. I heard shouting behind me as I slammed the door, Luke and his cousin at each other, Lyle calling Hunt's name over and over, Jack screeching incomprehensible gibberish. I didn't care. I booked it from Luke's room and out into the hallway without looking back. I don't really remember the journey to my end of the building very well. I remember taking off my clothes as I ran, throwing the vomit-crusted t-shirt and soaked pants into the corridor. I left my phone, keys, wallet. I'm usually protective of the necessities, but in the wee hours of that morning they didn't matter. Nothing did, save for removing as much of what had transpired from myself as possible. People laughed when they saw me sprinting naked through the halls, but the laughter quickly turned to shrieks and startled mutters as they came close enough to see the blood and puke slathering my lips. Somehow, I kicked down the door to my room. I'm not a strong guy, but desperation and adrenaline meant the old hinge gave way after 2 blows. Once sure the door was firmly barricaded by my wardrobe, I screamed my way through an hour-long shower. With the temperature up full, the water scaled my skin, at one point leaving actual blisters on my forearms, but it wasn't hot enough. Neither was the bleach I grated in with a scouring pad from the kitchen. Once, drips of reddish water started to drip from the end of my shame, I gave up, collapsing into a sobbing heap on the tiles. When I woke, the shower was still on, but had long since run cold. I dragged myself into my bedroom, glad that the curtains were still closed. Once I remembered that I had lost my phone, my laptop informed me it was 17:30. I'd slept for about 13 hours. Usually, I don't dream after a session. The spliffs and lines take care of that. But on the tiled floor, my dreams had been vivid, more lucid than I had ever experienced. Perfection. The word rang and regurgitated over and over in real time. Over half a day of formless contemplation of the meaning behind the word the revelatory film has instilled within me. Perfection. I checked Facebook and awoke to a horde of messages. The lads had been busy whilst I slept. Luke had killed his cousin. About 10 minutes after I had gone, the argument turned into a fistfight. Although from Lyle's punctuation-free 1,000-word-long message, I could tell it was less of a fight and more of a murder. Before Lyle knew what to do, Luke had grabbed his cousin's head, smashing the grinning face into a mirror over and over again until the nose was flat and shards of glass found their way through eyelids and into gray matter. Hunt had choked on his own vomit, but that's no surprise. After killing his cousin, Luke tried to rope Lyle and Jack into helping roll up both bodies in a duvet to dump somewhere. When Lyle refused, Luke had gone at him with a shard of glass. Jack was in no state to do anything, so Lyle grabbed him and they both legged it. The status update at the top of my newsfeed let me know what happened to Luke once they'd gone. Charlotte, Luke's flatmate, was going to need therapy for a long time, maybe forever. She was never one to shy away from details of her grievances online, and this time was no different. Her recollection of events would have been harrowing had it not been for my awakening. Upon barging through his door to investigate strange noises, she had found Luke, naked, kneeling on 2 face-down bodies. I imagine she didn't stick around long enough to find out who they were, or she had been told not to by the police she later mentioned had arrived. But I knew. He was laughing, crying, screaming, every emotion it was possible to feel. A shrieking monster surrounded by the dead and shards of bloodied mirror. The part that would truly disturb Charlotte. The part that would give her recurring nightmares of what should have been any normal morning was what he clenched in his hands and mouth. 3 sets of severed male genitals. Judging by her capitalized paragraph, Luke had a large wound between his legs that confirmed one of them was his own. Perfection. Flicking my eyes back to the message told me things hadn't gone much better in Jack and Lyle's flat. They lived on the 7th floor, a fact that Lyle wasn't quick enough to stop Jack exploiting. To prevent exactly what Jack had been planning, the large windows only opened a few inches. Lyle heard the glass smash, but was only able to kick the door through in time to catch the sight of Jack's ankles disappearing beyond the sill. By the time Lyle reached the window, Jack was a red crater on the concrete. A quick glance outside my curtain showed me at least 6 pairs of flashing lights. The door supervisor was talking to a police officer pointing up at my window. I knew what I had to do, but didn't have long to do it. Perfection. Lyle's message had ended there. There was no further communication from him, but I didn't need any. Lyle was smart. He would be doing the same as myself, I imagine. Maybe he already has. There was a couple of ambulances outside too, and they don't take away the dead in ambulances. Or maybe they do? I'd never been around a dead body before last night, so I'm not exactly what you'd call an expert. Something in my gut told me that Lyle was in one of them. I could sense him, awakened mind to awakened mind. I could see him sat in that ambulance, the paramedics shrieking, his head free of the unnecessary baggage that would have allowed him to see their frantic, tear-stained faces. Not long now, Lyle. I'll be with you soon. Perfection. Moving the barricade, interrupting my flatmates' romantic dinner, ignoring their screams as I threw the fridge in front of the door, stabbing them until they made no more noise, finding the potato peeler at the back of the cupboard. All of these I found easy. I had purpose now. I made sure to add the bed to the wardrobe when resealing my bedroom door behind me. I needed time, a resource that the hammering on the door to the flat beyond the barricade told me I didn't have. I could hear somebody shouting my name, a deep male voice, human in a way that I soon would not be. Perfection. I grasped the potato peeler in my hand. My palms were sweating, but not from nerves. It was anticipation. No, not anticipation, excitement. The same excitement I used to feel in that moment where a girl throws you down on her bed and unhooks her bra. The plastic pressed into my fingers felt realer than any woman I'd ever touched. I gazed at myself in the mirror. Bloodshot eyes, a hooked nose, lips dried out from too many cigarettes and late nights, all of it holding me back, all of it clouding my vision for so long. I didn't wince as the peeler made its first incision. I'm so glad I watched that fucking video. Perfection. I've always had a morbid sense of curiosity. And while that's not a fact I'm particularly proud of, I've always just jotted it down to teenage curiosity. To be honest, it probably started back in middle school, when people thought it was fun to send around horrible videos of executions and bizarre porn fetishes to each other on the MSN messaging site. Just mentioning it makes me feel old. These days, there's an overabundance of these sites. Places to watch people die. Blurry videos of car crashes, beheadings, and animal abuse. Of course, it's not something I actively seek out, but when I stumble across it, I feel compelled to just watch, to prove to myself that nothing can affect me. Though, for the truly gruesome stuff, one needs to visit the so-called dark web. As a guy who has fallen far behind in the advancement of technology, it absolutely baffled my mind that only a tiny fragment of the internet is available through a Google search. The rest, which makes up approximately 99.9%, is hidden and requires a special browser to access. With the help of a YouTube tutorial, I quickly downloaded the Tor browser and went on my way to search for the hidden aspects of the internet. It couldn't have taken more than half an hour of clicking on shared onion links before I stumbled across something that quenched my thirst for the horrible forever. The website itself was rather plain. Just a black background with a video player in its center and a chat box beneath. Within a few seconds of entering the website, the video itself had loaded and automatically started playing. What was depicted before me was a scrawny-looking man in his early 20s, strapped to a chair and covered in wounds. In the upper left corner of the video, a timer ran, counting up each second. 24 minutes and 14 seconds. "Please, stop, please, it was an accident, I swear," he yelled. A larger man entered the picture, a large needle in his hand, connected to an empty syringe. Without speaking a word, he stuck the needle as far as it could go, into the victim's abdomen. He let out a loud scream as the man removed the needle and plunged it back in. After a few stabs, the man grabbed a hammer and hit the victim straight in his jaw, shattering his mandible, leaving him unable to form any coherent speech. He let out a gargled whimper before passing out. I tried to forward the video, sure it had to be fake, but that's when I realized that it wasn't pre-recorded footage, but a live stream. 26 minutes and 12 seconds were the words that lit up the screen. The chat beneath the video went wild, calling out the victim as a pathetic excuse of a human being, demanding that man continued the torture. A few seconds passed, and the chat was replaced by a voting form containing only two options: life or death. The votes were quickly counting, the bar for death rising rapidly. As much as I could stomach, I wouldn't be part of an active murder, so I quickly voted for life. In the end, the results were displayed on the screen. Out of 200 people, the results were 95% for death, 4% for life. 1% did not vote. 10 people had tried to save the poor kid, but it wasn't enough. Without further warning, the man grabbed the hammer and started repeatedly hitting him, starting from the legs and working his way up until all that remained was a bloody pile of broken flesh. I sat speechless, staring helplessly at the screen as I noticed that my camera light had lit up. The video player vanished, and in its place, 10 smaller boxes popped up, all displaying people from various places around the world, all being unknowingly filmed by their own webcams. To my absolute horror, one of the boxes showed my bedroom, and myself wearing a terrified expression. It quickly dawned on me that these were the people who voted to save the poor kid. "Who will be next?" a message said as a timer counted down towards 0. A few boxes turned black, to which the chat responded with laughter, a hopeless attempt at escape. 3, 2, 1. 9 of the 10 pictures disappeared from the screen, including my own, leaving the screen occupied by a middle-aged Asian man frozen in fear. "We'll see you soon. Good luck." I let out a sigh of both relief and panic. I'd escaped unharmed, but not everyone was that lucky. Of course, I called the police, but by the time they could even look into it, the link had long since expired. I don't know what else I could have done, but it taught me not to look too deep into the depths of the dark web. In retrospect, it's kinda ironic that my love for the science I chose would be my predicament. I mean, it looks unfair that my curiosity and thirst for knowledge would lead me in such a shady path. Only thing I ever wanted was to be better at my job. I am a medicine student. For as long as I can remember myself, I was fascinated by the human body. No matter how bad we treat it sometimes, it is nothing sort of perfection. The structure and function of the organs, the delicate high-functioning brain, the blue snake-like veins carrying the blood into the heart to be cleaned and recycled. Simply magnificent. It was a simple choice for me. I wanted to study more about the body, learn all the details it hides, and sometimes rectify it. Now don't get me wrong, I didn't really enjoy studying to get to medicine school. Most of the time it was a tedious process of learning about irrelevant topics that I really didn't care about, but I managed to pull through and get into the university. There, I developed very mixed feelings. Although some lectures were diving into the secrets of what we were supposed to be learning about, most were simple stuff read from a PDF presentation by a semi-bored professor. The kind of knowledge you could acquire by reading some science magazines. Magazines I had already read, so most of the times I went to the campus feeling indifferent, secretly hoping that I could get to learn something amazing, like perhaps a new fun fact in the anatomy class. But that was rare. I can't say I have many friends. Come to think of it, I don't think I have any. I am friendly with all my classmates and peers, but we really don't have anything else in common, other than we study the same subject. They didn't study the way I did. Most of them valued the prestige and paycheck that comes with being a doctor. Some truly wanted to help others in times of sickness. But no one wanted to actually learn. Not the way I did. They consumed themselves in parties while I went the extra mile and studied something more than the given material every night, just to tame my lust for knowledge. I remember the day Jonathan approached me in the campus cafeteria. It was in a break between some classes we both participated. He sat opposite to me and asked me how I was doing. We chatted a bit about everything and nothing, and mostly regarding some projects we were working as homework at the time. I liked this guy. Jonathan wasn't the best student or the most intriguing person, but I knew he also truly loved medicine and tried his best to learn more than what the university spoon-fed us. I respected him for that. So, it came as a pleasant surprise when he introduced me to a new idea. "Hey, man," he said. "I know that you feel bored here. I sort of get it too sometimes." Boy, was he right. "I have found a man that really knows his stuff," he continued. And then more hesitantly, "There is a link to the dark web of a very good doctor. His methods are a bit unconventional, so he can't broadcast for the normies. But he is really skillful. I mean, at least his teaching has helped me a lot with my exams." He laughed at this. I thought about it for a while before answering. "Sure," I said. "Let's see what this mysterious doctor has to offer." By then, I had read many books and articles already, and I would give anything to see something fresh. Jonathan smiled and gave me a note with the alleged link. "Nice, bro. If you need any help with this dark web thing, give me a call. My phone is also on that note. Would be cool to chill out in this doctor's chat room and learn from him." I didn't have to call him. I politely said goodbye as he left and resumed with my lunch. But I was curious now. I am by no means a computer guy, but I can work my way through some stuff. So I won't bore you with the details of how I got to the site. Most of you here are familiar with this kind of stories anyway. The path is simple. You get the appropriate software to enable you to go into the deep web, and then you start searching. You have to be very specific for what you are looking for. Otherwise, you'll get lost in a mountain of cyber junk. And specific I was. I got to the link I wanted relatively fast. It was a site called Anatomy 102. It had a plain gray template and the classical ancient Greek symbol of medicine as a logo, a snake wrapping itself around a rod, although it was a little different than the usual one. The snake looked like it was biting on something, and that something sort of resembled a human skull. That looked a little peculiar. There was a camera focused on an empty white room, and also a chat room. The chat room had around 50 people active, casually talking about various medicine specializations, speculating what they would learn about today. Around 10 minutes later, 2 people appeared in the room, both wearing the typical Operation ROM uniforms, dragging a big table of surgery tools with them. One of them disappeared from the screen and the other stood in front of the camera still wearing his mask. "Hello, my dear audience. It brings me great pleasure to see so many of you here today. This a place of learning and understanding, so I would advise all of you to pay attention and observe all the details." I liked this intro, a true professor. For all those who happen to be new here, let me introduce myself. I am going by the name Dr. Mason here, but you can just address me as Doctor in the chat. Every 2 weeks, we gather around here to discuss something about anatomy and how it works in practical ways. As he finished his words, the second guy got in the frame again, this time pushing a surgery table before him. The table was full. I guessed it had a dead body or a sleeping person on it. By that time, the count on the chat room read 250 online people. The other guy, also wearing a mask, took the sheet that was covering the body on the bed to reveal something I was not prepared for. A living human, fully awake, muffled and tied on the bed with leather straps. He was middle-aged, with brown hair and a very scared look in his eyes. The man was sweaty and in obvious distress but couldn't do much, tied like a piece of meat as he was. As you may know, the doctor continued, the digestive system is one of the most important systems in the human body. It is the source of all the energy input and output of animals. Today, we'll give it a closer look. The chat box was filled with lots of expressions of happiness, as people seemed to be content with the idea of the session. I, for once, felt nervous. I could never expect what followed next. The doctor started operating the man on the bed without using any anesthesia. He cut open an incision in his belly, while the man's screams were drowned behind the muffler. After that, he started taking parts of the victim's intestines out and showing them on the camera, talking in detail about everything, and also applied pressure at certain points to demonstrate what he was talking about, generating huge amounts of pain for the helpless victim. During the whole process, he showed no hint of emotion. The chat was filled with questions, most of which he replied to, same way our professors talked to us back in uni. He paid extra attention to those who wanted him to experiment on the limitations of the victim. He noted that the people asking those questions had true motivation to learn and will progress in their career. After that statement, he followed through with the suggestions given to him. Blood had started to make a puddle on the floor. Every now and then, the victim would faint by the sheer pain he felt, but the doctor's helper would wake him up every time. The doctor insisted that it is important for the patient to have his senses in order for us to take notes of his reactions. I was shocked, but I couldn't look away. Same thing when you see a gruesome accident on the street, and you know that if you check to see what happened, you'll feel the urge to throw up, but you still turn your head and look, your eyes thirsty for the odd and the gore. The procedure was getting more and more extreme. The incision was even bigger now, and the doctor was explaining the reflexes of the stomach while holding the actual man's organ in his hand. He applied pressure to it, and a wave of gastric fluids went through the now crying man's esophagus, choking him as he was lying face up. It didn't last much longer after this. The victim went unconscious, and it seems that even the helper couldn't bring him up anymore. After a few tries, the helper looked at the doctor and nodded. The doctor then returned his face to the camera. "All right, class, that's all I had to talk about today. Any questions?" A few messages appeared on the chat box, and he selectively answered some of them. "Unfortunately, that's all the time we had for today, class," he said, and then continued, "Okay, who would like to volunteer for the next lesson?" The chat was suddenly silent. Oh, come on, such a shy audience. You will never become true scientists if you're afraid to take risks. But anyhow, most of you know the procedure. If no one volunteers, I will randomly choose someone from the chat, and by next lecture in 2 weeks' time, he will be the person in the bed leading all of you guys into enlightenment. To be honest, the patient's job is more important than mine. I'm just explaining things, so he should be very proud and cherish the fact that he is actually the real teacher. Still silence. "All right then, but I'm not happy about that," he went on. "Let me find someone myself." He appeared to be searching for something on his monitor. "Username HealthyRaven96 will be with us next lesson. I'll see you all then." HealthyRaven96 got instantly disconnected. The others started to log out too, while some stayed to discuss the lesson. I turned off my PC. What had I just watched? This was more like a cult than a classroom. It wasn't natural to use a human guinea pig for teaching, but still, I learned so much. This person talked with so much passion for science and had a strange charisma, you may even call it charm. But no matter. I decided to never open this site again. I was not going to be participating in this illegal situation. I knew how wrong this was, but deep inside me, my everlasting thirst was still demanding more. I broke my promise 2 weeks later. It was the day of the supposed lecture, and I just couldn't take it out of my mind. I logged in for Anatomy 102 once again. This time, a young woman was on the bed. The process was similar. Dr. Mason introduced himself and started his lesson, this time focused on the nervous system. I was hooked before I even knew it and watched the entire talk without even flinching this time. Until the moment that the unlucky girl was dead, I hadn't even moved from my chair. And this became a part of my life. I was following every lecture showing 100% attendance. I watched as men, women, and some rare times even underage people were brought to their untimely death for the sake of science. I started participating actively, asking questions about amputations and tissue damage, and sometimes I was the one who suggested the craziest experiments. I wasn't addicted to the gore in particular, but it was a small price to pay for knowledge. I learned so much, for example, that the pain threshold we are taught that the human body can withstand is bullshit. I saw with my very own eyes how much the human organism can suffer before giving up for good. That and many other things that are not to be told in this post. The months went by fast. I kept watching the lectures. Some rare times, there was someone aspired so much from the doctor's words that he or she would volunteer for the lesson, making all of us sigh in relief. But those times were rare. It was mostly Russian roulette every week. I was scared, of course, but the risk was well worth the reward. At the same time, I studied even harder, completely locking myself out of the real world. I wanted to learn even more now. So much was I inspired by this masked man. Then a day came, which I never expected to come. The doctor had finished a lecture slowly turning a man's brain into mashed potatoes, and as always, was looking for a volunteer. After the usual awkward silence, I heard something truly terrifying. Okay then, students, next to come here with us will be Lotus Clips, my username. My stupid username made as a pun of my favorite car. I had thought that this might happen, but never actually thought it would. The chances were always pretty low, and I was enjoying the classes way too much to stop. For the first time since that fateful day that I learned about this damned site, I called the only man that could understand me, Jonathan. He picked up the phone. We talked for a long time, and in the end, we managed to formulate a solution. We spent the rest of the time until the lecture in my house. We were together all the time in order to succeed what we planned. 3 days before the lesson was to happen, we were attacked while we were in the house. I don't know how they found us, but truth be told, the doctor had never failed to locate his forced volunteer. He was with his helper, as I had predicted. Jonathan had a flash earlier this week and had bought us gas masks as a precaution. I don't know how he foresaw that, but we were prepared for the gas that our stalkers used that night. I guess that's how the doctor managed to get his victims in the operating room in one piece every time. People perhaps were prepared for an assault, but very few had thought of that. I was lucky to have access to a gun, heirloom of my early past father, and managed to shoot the knee of the doctor before he could attack. The helper was not much of this ice-cold man I had thought of when I watched the live streams. He was very willing to help us with whatever we wanted, in exchange for his life. After I got all the information I wanted, I shot him in the head just to take his annoying whinnying out of my ears. And here we are today. As I'm typing this, I hear the muffled voice of a man behind me. It was easy to get the codes for the streaming and the doctor's username and password from the crying helper pleading for his life, so that I could continue the job and the idea he had started. I felt that he had helped me a lot during this time, and it was time for me to help others myself. With Jonathan at my side, we would venture to experiments which no one had even dared to conduct. We would take science and medicine many steps ahead, through our will to try new things. But it just felt right that I would give Dr. Mason a great gift. He always believed that the man in the bed was doing the greater sacrifice, and I wanted him to have this honor, for his last ever appearance in the classroom. His screams and violent shaking on the bed, though, gave a different suggestion. I guess he wasn't such a believer and pioneer as he always thought. But no matter, the time is now for someone new to take his place, someone with vision, skills, and cunningness, someone like me to continue his work. So, friends, I invite you all to join us. We will learn together and find answers to all the questions we still have for the human body, so that in time we can have perfect knowledge of medicine and its practices. Come to the stream and be a part of the class, as we'll examine all that there is to the human organism. And feel free to ask any questions you like. My helper and I will be happy to answer them, or show some real-life examples to help you understand better. Now, if you'll excuse me, the lesson is about to start, and I have planned a very special lecture as a parting gift for Dr. Mason. I will see you all in class. As you may have guessed, I am an artist. As an artist, I love to explore different styles, but I am old school in the sense that I refrain from using digital means to make my art. There is an entirely distinct elegance and fulfillment in watching my art grow from pencil scribbles to a vibrant depiction of whatever dominated my mind's eye at the time. While I would love to promote my artwork, it will soon become apparent why I cannot share much that could lead back to me. A few weeks ago, I started to grow tired of painting the same old style of portraits, objects, and scenes. I craved for something new, and I began exploring again. I should mention that I am, in my free time, an avid user of the deep web. Do not get me wrong. I do nothing illicit or taboo or find hitmen to hire. I just love seeing all the peculiar and intriguing things the deep web has to offer. Therefore, while going through this drought of inspiration, I found a bustling art community on the deep web that was entirely unique. Named The Nightmare Artists, this website was dedicated to disturbing and unsettling artwork. I opened the website, and I was immediately fascinated. This site was a web forum not unlike Reddit. Each post was a picture of a piece of artwork that someone had made. However, they all revolved around themes that would be considered dark by even the most depraved of art enthusiasts. Despite their disturbing theme, I was encapsulated by their detail. As I went through them, I grew to develop an uncanny admiration for the effort and time that must have gone into each piece of work. Meanwhile, the forum itself was bustling. Posts were being made every few hours, and commentors consistently had something to say. There was even a detailed guide on how the site could be located after a domain change. I could not believe I had not heard of this place before. The artwork, however alarming, left me in awe. Each piece looked meticulously and skillfully made. Even the milder ones, such as the depictions of mental illness and self-harm, were memorable. I fondly recall a sketch of a vortex of letters and words sinking into the gray matter of a rotting but alive human head. It was a strong allegory of ADHD and dyslexia. Others depicted grotesque scenes of carnage and violence. One of my favorites was an oil painting of a gladiator smashing the heads of two peasants together. While the idea itself was fairly primitive and non-abstract, the intricacy of each droplet of blood on the glistening golden armor, coupled with the unadulterated look of panic and fear on the peasants' faces, made the painting pristine. These were all amazing, but the ones that I still have strong memories of are the ones more fantastical and unique in their uncanniness. These are the ones that made me question the mental state of the artist. An acrylic painting that stuck out distinctly depicted a weird being that was a ramshackle abomination of different animal parts knitted together with a human head. A leathery crocodile-like hide attached to an abdomen of long gray tentacles that seemed to levitate the thing off the ground where the animals whose parts had been used lay. The thing had more apidionages protruding from its upper torso that resembled the furry arms of a gorilla. Where the chest should have been sat a large eye with a thin, inquisitive pupil that seemed to glimpse directly into my soul. While I would go on with these descriptions, it would all be peripheral to the point of me sharing my experience with you. Suffice to say that this online forum was a treasure trove for artists and enthusiasts that admired and made work that was less conventional. I spent an entire day gawking at the works before I was overcome by tenacity and motivation. I was inspired. I was no longer in my frustrated creative confusion. I had decided that I would make my very own piece of unnerving art. Perhaps this could be a niche that invigorated me to produce something beyond the usual half-decent mediocrity. Over the next week, I worked consistently. Day and night, I would be in my studio working on creating something marvelous in its unfiltered macabre form. While I had peered on the edge of such a style in my artistic career, I had never worked with such a conviction on any of my other work. A thought penetrated my determined state. Could this be it? The genre I had always been looking for. Did I no longer have to aimlessly make half-hearted pieces to keep my fans content? At the week's end, I was done. I uploaded my pride onto the forum under my alias Lawless Creator 24. The artwork in question was an oil painting of crows picking at the corpses of fallen soldiers on a battlefield, while a beautiful sunset painted the sky in a magical amalgam of pinks and reds in the background. I named it Life Goes On and uploaded it onto the site. I did not anticipate the popularity it would go on to garner. My painting held first place on the forum for an entire day. I was elated and had already begun planning for another piece. When I opened the website the next day, I noticed that I had received a message from a prolific and respected artist on the website that went by the alias Machination of Doom. It read, "Hello, Lawless Creator 24. I absolutely loved your most recent upload. Could I know what brand of paint you used?" After sharing the brand in question, I conversed with him further about his art style and creations he loved most. He seemed very insistent on finding the right colors to make his art as realistic as possible. After half an hour of text conversation, he sent me the following message. "I noticed that in a discussion in the comments you mentioned you were from the San Francisco Bay Area. I live there too. Would you like to meet up for a drink sometime?" I was ecstatic. Not only had I made a piece of art I was fully satisfied with, but I was already budding up with my contemporaries in the genre. We quickly arranged to meet at a famous bar for the very next evening itself, and I spent the entire night in a restless fit as I wondered how things would play out. Come that evening, I walked into the bar and texted him. "I'm here in the dark blue shirt next to the entrance." I saw a man walk up to me. He smiled as he prepared to greet me. He looked somewhat rat-like, to put it lightly. He couldn't be more than 5'4", and I had a mild suspicion that he was using shoe lifts after witnessing his awkward gait. He had a chinless mouth with teeth that seemed to protrude beyond his lower lip. His oily skin had a yellowish hue to it, and his coarse mane seemed to shrivel in self-embarrassment at the end of each hair. Despite this, it looked like he took care of himself. His teeth glistened white, and his hair was as neatly combed as it could be. He wore a dress shirt and tapered pants. I thought he had either gotten off work or he was not too versed with trendy attire. I, being average-looking myself, did not dwell on his appearance. "Hey, Lawless Creator, call me Carl," he said, with a tinge of awkwardness, as he walked up to me and extended his arm in an invitation for a handshake. He had an odd accent I could not put my finger on. He sounded nasally and somewhat monotonous. As he drew closer with his handshake, I caught a whiff of his odor. The heavy use of deodorant and perfume seemed to mask the scent of rot and decay. I wrote this off as innocuous, and I was still optimistic about the meeting. "Hi, Carl. Great that we finally met. I'm Mark. Let's grab those stools over there," I responded, smiling. As we sat down and began enjoying beers, our conversation shifted away from trivial matters like the weather or current city affairs and towards our artwork. "I loved what you did with that painting with the crows." "Thank you. It's great to receive all the appreciation. I honestly didn't expect it to do that well," I responded. "I was thoroughly impressed with your most recent piece too, the one with the cats and the restrained man." I shot back a compliment about one of his most acclaimed works on the site. "Thank you. I was wondering what you thought of it. It took a lot of time and sweat. Here, let me show you." He chuckled as he reached for his phone. "Sure," I eagerly responded, wondering what he was about to show me. His phone screen lit to life, and he perfunctorily tapped at it before turning it to me. I recognized the image straight away. It had been up on the website a few days ago, and everyone had been blown away by its detail. The website had featured the painting of a man sitting in a chair with his hands and legs restrained with two cats in his lap, curiously clawing at a bloody opening in his abdomen as the man stared down in pure terror. This image on the phone screen seemed to be a, somehow, more elaborate version of it. I was perplexed until I scooched my bar stool closer and peered forward to look more closely. This was not the realism of an artist's work, nor was this the clever editing of a piece of artwork to make it look more realistic. Then I noticed the timestamp. It was not a piece of art, it was a picture shot on a camera. As I came to the harrowing revelation, my heart began to race, and my skin grew damp in a cold sweat. "Neat, isn't it?" I froze in place and looked into his eyes. They were crazed and manic in their anticipation. Before another word could be uttered, I ran out of the bar as fast as my feet could carry me. I rushed home and sat petrified, my mind unable to construe anything besides fear. As I slowly gained my composure, I realized that I must have dropped my phone during the run, since I could not find it anywhere. I booted up my computer to change my passwords and delete my account on that god-forsaken website, and I saw that I'd just gotten an email from myself. I thought someone may have found my phone, but then I read it. "You'd make a fine specimen for my next piece." I apologize for any odd phrasing or typos. For the past couple of days, I've been having trouble eating and I'm feeling pretty lightheaded. Sleep also hasn't come easy. Honestly, being behind a computer is probably the last place where I should be, but I need to get this off my chest before I can carry on with my life. We live in a time of constant distraction. Some spend their days with podcasts buzzing in their earbuds. Some calm their minds with a constant stream of YouTube shorts, and others make ambiance for their apartment with quiet, Netflixed sitcoms. For the past couple of months, my choice of attention dollar has been unsecured CCTV cameras. I'd eat my lunches to feeds from vape shops in Bangladesh or quiet intersections in Stockholm. Working home office has instilled a sense of gentle claustrophobia in me. The live feeds assured me that life existed beyond the 3 rooms of my apartment. For a long time, I found those assurances soothing. But then I found the warehouse cam. It was in an unsorted directory and there were no identifying marks in the footage. I was looking at a feed from the side of some warehouse that bordered the edges of an industrial district. The camera was low, but the streets were empty. I had seen feeds like that before, yet what caught my eye was the gentle snowfall. Beyond the warehouse there was a forest of pine trees. When I had started my lunch, they were their usual dark green. Yet, as I ate, and as the first snow of the season fell, the trees slowly turned heavy with white. The tranquil scene had kept me distracted from my thoughts as I ate, and I was getting ready to search for something new. But then I saw people. A procession, to be precise. At least 36 people dressed in lab coats walked down the road towards the forest in a single file line. They weren't dressed for the cold, and none of them seemed to be pleased with their journey, yet they walked without pause or stumble. I watched the camera long after the scientists had marched by, hoping for at least a hint of explanation, yet none came. The snow stopped falling, and the empty streets and forest became a near static image. I went back to work, but I did bookmark the camera address and took note of the time. The next day, as I took my lunch break, I caught the procession once more. They arrived at the same exact time as they did the day prior. More snow had fallen, and it covered much of the sidewalk, yet the scientists moved no slower. With faces completely blank of expression and clothes not suited for the winter, the scientists marched through the snow and disappeared into the forest. On the third day, when the snow turned to slush, they marched once more. The people in lab coats made the same trip at the same time every day of the week. Even during the weekend, when I didn't have to be behind my computer, I would attend our scheduled lunch appointment. Every day they walked by, and every day I was there to watch them. I found the mystery of the scientists exhilarating, and its regularity allowed it to be a constant in my days. Even when I wasn't on my lunch break, I would keep the camera feed running on the background of my browser in hopes of catching a passing car's license plate or anything else that would help me locate the feed. I wanted to know where the scientists were. I wanted to know who they were so that I could understand their daily march. Yet, no such opportunity presented itself. The nature of the camera feed remained a frustrating mystery. It irritated me. I wanted to know more about the scientists. I was naive back then. I did not realize the comfort that existed in my unknowing. 3 days ago, on my lunch break, I was once again counting down the minutes to the usual appearance of the scientists. I had gotten into the habit of only eating when they finally appeared on screen, and I was quite hungry that day. The moment I saw them, however, I lost my sense of appetite. They still marched through the snow of the sidewalk and mud of the forest trail. They still wore their lab coats, and they still moved in their orderly single file without pause. Yet, the scientists had changed. They were burnt. They were all horribly burnt. With some, the flesh had slipped off parts of their face and revealed the bone beneath. Others still had eyes and skin, yet the extent of the damage was undoubtedly fatal. None of them should have been capable of walking. None of them should have been alive. I watched my screen with utter shock and disgust. The innocent questions I had about the daily procession of scientists turned into sheer terror. My heart was seized with fear, and my stomach had been thoroughly robbed of all appetite, yet my mind still hungered for knowledge. Knowing that no one would believe me on my word alone, I decided to record the procession the next day. I had hoped that, perhaps, with video evidence of the scientists, someone would be able to see something I had missed. The next day, I attempted to record the procession, and it was a grave mistake. Over the months, I had gotten used to the unfriendly weather that would occasionally accompany the scientists. But when I tuned into the feed the following day, there was a snowstorm, the strength of which I had never witnessed before. The sidewalks were engulfed in snow, and the road itself seemed impossible to pass through by car. The weather was horrid, yet the line of burnt scientists still marched. They forced their way through the snow without rest or pause as they always did. That day, however, as the final scientist of the march passed the camera, they stopped. Their skin was too charred for me to get even an inkling of their identity, yet they clearly stopped and looked at the camera. Slowly, but clearly noticeable on my screen, The scientists shook their head. It was as if they knew I was watching them. Though I was in my warm apartment, looking at the snow-filled scene made me shiver. It wasn't until after the scientist had left, however, that I felt true fear. I do most of my work on the computer. I have not skimmed on making sure I have a strong rig. A simple screen recording is nothing my machine couldn't handle. Yet, when I tried watching back the footage from the procession, the video was a complete slideshow. I had tried collecting evidence of the burnt scientists, but all I have is pixelated shots of a snowstorm. When I woke up the next morning, I was committed to making another attempt at capturing the procession. That, however, would not be possible. My internet access had been completely shut off. When I called my ISP to figure out what had happened, I was placed into a 2-hour waiting queue. When I finally managed to talk to a representative, they were cagey. Apparently, my internet had been shut off due to criminal use. Apparently, the police would contact me about the details. I write this post on my phone while sitting at a bistro. I do not know which law I have broken, and I trust the situation with the police will be quickly resolved. Yet I fear staying in my home. I fear that whoever is responsible for that procession of burnt scientists knows my IP address. I write this post on my phone while sitting in a bistro. This place used to be one of my favorite lunch spots whenever I wanted to treat myself and order in. I've never refused a burger from this place. It's the best in the city. I'm hungry, and the air is filled with delightful smells, yet I can't bring myself to eat. Because whenever I try, all I can think of is the burnt scientists. Some people are terrified of going on the dark web. Most people wouldn't even know where to begin. But me? I've gotten way too comfortable searching the bowels of the deep web and its darkest corners of depravity. I work as a fence of sorts. Taking advantage of most people's technical ineptitude, I make a profit from selling illicit items to folks in my hometown. Once upon a time, I got these things from other sources. But nowadays, you can get anything, and I mean anything, delivered to your door with the click of a mouse. It's cheap and surprisingly reliable. There's no such thing as morals when you have a job like I do, selling all manner of questionable items. I guess because of that, you could argue I deserved what happened to me. I was sitting in my home office, feeling bored and lonely. Having a 2-story, 4-bedroom house with a giant backyard is kind of pointless when you have nobody to share it with, and the thought occurred to me again that I should get a dog. People on Instagram and Facebook had dogs, and they all looked content and happy with their lives. Out in the sun, playing frisbee and rolling around on blankets in the grass. Why couldn't that be me? It had been a while since I had a real girlfriend too, so the thought of using the pooch as an icebreaker for talking to women also crossed my mind. I got up the courage to finally do it. Then and there deciding to get a puppy that I could raise up to be a loyal and faithful companion, to share my big house which felt so empty. Without really thinking about it, I did what I always did when I wanted to buy something. I opened the Tor browser on my laptop and went to my favorite illicit site. For some reason, the idea of going to a normal website or to a breeder or pet store didn't cross my mind until later. In retrospect, that would have made a lot more sense. I typed in dog in the search bar, but only one ad came up. I clicked on it. Puppy for sale, purebred Southern Wolfhound, $500 USD, will deliver. There was a picture of a very cute little black dog. I had never heard of a Southern Wolfhound before. It didn't look like one I had ever seen. Then again, I didn't know much about dogs. Not being one for shopping around, I punched in my credit card info and clicked the buy button. A few days later, a wide-eyed and nervous-looking delivery man knocked on my door. At his feet sat an oversized dog crate that was pitch black inside. Nothing could be seen within it. His trembling hands passed me a tablet, and I signed for the delivery and brought the heavy crate into my house. The dog was a lively one, I thought to myself. When I picked up the crate, it started moving restlessly inside, feeling more like a giant python than a puppy. Its weight didn't seem to match what I had seen in the picture. I wondered briefly if there had been some sort of shipping mistake and almost ran back after the delivery guy. But when I opened it up there, it was an adorable black puppy wandered out hesitantly and then ran over to me. My fears were instantly assuaged as the little scamp began to lick my face, and I fell on my back, laughing. I let it jump up on me, and we rolled around and played on the floor for a while. A smile stretched wide across my face, and I felt truly happy as I played with the little dog. I took the puppy around the house for a tour, showing him the upstairs first, my bedroom and the office. He sniffed around the guest room I never used, and another that was for storage. I showed him the basement and the little bed I had bought for him. He didn't seem particularly interested in it. The strangest thing about the puppy was his weight. He was a hefty little guy. When I tried to pick him up, he weighed a ton, and it didn't make sense. The more I thought about it, the more it made me feel uncomfortable and jittery, like the dog was a hole in the universe leading to unreality. A black hole leading to some other dark place that I didn't want to see. Trying not to dwell too much on that, mostly because it made my brain feel like it was going to turn into scrambled eggs if I did, I decided to take my new puppy out for a walk at the park. I tried to put the leash on him that I had recently bought, but it never seemed to fasten quite right. It was like the collar was too small for him. But it wasn't. I could see that clearly. My mind felt fragmented and wrong as I struggled with it, seeing two realities for a split second. In one reality, I could see my puppy. The other image was like a piece of rogue glass in a shattered mirror, revealing a tremendous wolf-like hound. Its fur was missing in places, bone and exposed muscle peeking out from between its haunches and ribs. The beast's ancient, knowing face was full of sharp teeth, bared and snarling at me. Wise, experienced eyes stared through my soul, milky white with cataracts. Dirt was all over the hound and old blood like it had been digging in a graveyard. Soon, we were walking down the street to the park, despite the fact I had no memory of leaving my house. The puppy was back to being a puppy, and he was off leash, I noticed. Still, he seemed to be managing well enough. He was staying close by me and was quick to respond when I called to him. It was as if he was already well trained despite his young age. So I decided to just continue on and kept walking towards the park with him. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and it was quiet outside. I didn't see anyone until we got there. Once we got to the park, I saw a few other people were out walking with their dogs in the large open space. It was a huge, grassy field, and people would often let their dogs off-leash despite the official rules to the contrary. So I didn't feel as out of place with the pup roaming free there as I had been walking down the street with him. At first, nobody noticed us, but then the dogs picked up the puppy's scent one by one. They perked up their ears and stood stock still, staring at us. They appeared terrified. My little pup, who I hadn't even had time to name yet, began to run towards them. I saw the stunned faces of the dog's owners. Their jaws dropped, and they looked suddenly horrified for some reason. I didn't understand it. My dog was just a little puppy. They turned and began to flee. What were they so afraid of, I wondered, chasing after the little guy, and that's when it happened again. A little piece of my life went missing. 1 second I was there in the park running after the dog, the next we were back home again. It was as if I had just lost the last little bit of my life. It seemed like just a second before we had been in the park and I had been calling after my puppy as he ran away from me, chasing after him. But now we were back in my living room watching television, an old rerun of The Office on Netflix. Pulling out my cell phone, I checked the time. It was 4:30 p.m. More than 2 hours had passed. I looked down to see the puppy was at my feet, sleeping soundly. At least he was safe, but that didn't make the blackout I had just experienced feel any better. "What happened, boy?" I asked the dog, as if he would be able to tell me. He just kept snoring, and I noticed there was blood on his paws and on his face. Feeling more scared than I had been in a long time, I tried to recall what had happened. Nothing came back to me, no matter how hard I searched my memories. This had never happened before, and it really frightened me. I hoped my memories would come back to me, but they never did. Worse yet, over the following weeks it happened again and again. The blackouts. Every time I left the house with the dog, my life would seem to disappear. Time would disappear. I would step out the door, then find myself immediately back inside with hours missing from my day. The blank periods would get longer and longer, and after a couple weeks I was up to missing 8-hour chunks from my life which I could remember no details from. It seemed to always be when I left the house, so I started doing that less and less, hiding indoors and never leaving my home. I ordered my groceries delivery and became a hermit. The puppy seemed content, though, and he was growing at a rapid pace. Despite the fact that we spent all hours together, even I could notice the changes. Overnight, he seemed to sprout up a couple of inches, and every morning I would see he was bigger than before. When I looked at the dog, every worry I had about the missing fragments of my life disappeared. Only the puppy mattered. He was what was important. The warmth I felt when I was holding him, and how he looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered to him as well. Eventually, my friends started to get concerned about me. My old buddy Tom called, saying he hadn't seen me in a while. I told him I was fine, I just didn't want to leave the house because I had a new puppy. Telling him the truth didn't occur to me, but maybe I should have. Maybe I could have prevented what happened next. I didn't ask Tom to come over. He just stopped by one evening a day or two after our phone call. We were such good friends that he didn't even wait for me to answer after knocking on the door. He just walked in. The dog had grown considerably by that point. He stood up at attention when Tom walked in, and the wolfhound immediately bolted for the front door. My old friend was halfway through saying, "Hello," before he began to scream. Again, the world fragmented and split, and I saw two versions of my dog. One of them was the cute little guy I knew and loved. The other was the decaying graveyard hellhound I had glimpsed before. Massive and mangy, missing bits of flesh and fur and eager to attack. Before Tom had a chance to run, my dog was on him. The hellhound was on him. He jumped up on him, knocking him to the ground. Quickly, he was on his neck with his paws and ripped the flesh from his face while he screamed and clawed at the door, trying to escape. I ran over to pull the dog off my old friend. When I reached out to grab him, to try to stop him as he tore muscle from bone and gouged out Tom's eyes with his teeth, he snapped at me. The sharp teeth scraped off my fingers, and I looked down, horrified to see a glimpse of my own shiny white phalanges staring back at me. Hair-covered knuckle flesh dangling limply from the exposed bone. I recoiled from him, screaming, and ran. Tom was already dead by the time I got upstairs. His screams cut short as the evil wolf ripped out his larynx. Slamming the door to my office shut behind me, I locked the door. I'm back in my office where all this started. I'm terrified to go back out that door. Now that the hellhound has a taste of my flesh, I doubt that he'll be able to resist. I can hear him sniffing and scratching outside already. Hungry again after consuming every last bit of my oldest and best friend. There wasn't much to do other than wait for my inevitable demise, so I decided to browse the dark web again. I wanted to see something. I went back to the same hidden site again, navigating through a series of back doors to get there. Clicking secret icons hidden in obscure websites, Once I arrived there, I typed the word dog into the search bar again. The same exact ad came up. Identical. Puppy for sale. Purebred Southern Wolfhound. 500 USD. Will deliver. This time, I decided to send a direct message to the seller, someone named Lycan, user 53. Hey, I bought one of your dogs and it just killed my friend. I'm pretty sure it's eating my memories too. Lycan, the creature you have purchased is no dog. It is a Vricolichus, an undead creature which sustains itself on flesh and blood, like a werewolf zombie, Chi DNA. User 53, sounds more like a zombie werewolf to me. Can I please have a refund? Lycan, no. All sales are final. Lycan has exited the chat. With that, he disappeared back into the ether and left me with the beast scratching at my door, trying to get in. It won't be long before he gets through the door, I'm sure. And when he gets in, I'm not sure what he'll do, but I've got a pretty good idea. You have Googled yourself at some point or another. Admit it, there's nothing shameful about it. It's not worse than what I did. I searched my name on the dark web. Don't ever make that same mistake. I was 19 years old then. Liv, my girlfriend, and her family were kind enough to let me live in their guest bedroom at the start of that year. They liked the fact that I could fix most of their computer problems. Liv is a great person, and what she saw in a hacker who could never survive for long in the 9-to-5 world is beyond me. Their house was in a suburb only a few blocks away from a library and coffee shops with free Wi-Fi. These locations were convenient for my burgeoning career as a digital outlaw. I used those resources until I was able to move out and get a small apartment of my own. After a string of demeaning jobs and abusive bosses, I found financial independence. I did this after I learned how to buy and sell things I shouldn't have with the use of my Tor browser. I engaged in illegal transactions such as ordering counterfeit money and stolen IDs. I discovered there was a large market for manufactured psychedelics. I often went to the skate park to sell those items off the nethermost landscape of the World Wide Web. Business was good. A young man with years spent in foster care, I sought out activities which gave me a sense of control. A childhood of not having any will do that to you. The ability to navigate the online world to get almost whatever I wanted afforded me a sense of power. It was all going well until one evening in July. I sat on the second level of a Barnes & Noble bookstore in a corner next to the self-help section. I always did my best work there. The place was starting to go under, and I did not have to worry about an influx of patrons. Despite having a disguised IP address, I never wanted to risk a raid at home. The items were always shipped to a P.O. box instead of my unit number as well. In retrospect, these were all flimsy safety measures. They still gave me a sense of comfort, even if they were a tad delusional. I made sure there were not any cameras mounted near where I sat. It was a small space out of the way of the general public. Hiding in plain sight was always my preferred method. I drank strong coffee out of an oversized styrofoam cup. After 15 minutes of searching, I grew bored. I typed in my name, Joshua Wells. An input of my identity on that part of the web should be an indicator of how successful and arrogant I had become. I did not expect Wikipedia to be among the results, but it was the third link down. The first one involved a ghost tour in New Jersey. The guide had a similar name. The second was a gore website I was not interested in. While I may have been a thrill seeker, I was not out to consume media which capitalized on hurting others. I clicked on the third article link because of the title. It was about a television show. It read The Short Life of Joshua Wells. At first, the title did not startle me, since there are plenty of others with the same name. Recaps of 10 episodes were on the page. The first paragraph illustrated how the series did not continue past season 1. I read the summary of the first episode for the sake of passing time. Episode 1. Joshua's father is a known and feared gang member. His mother is a helpless addict. She has hopes of making a profit by dealing narcotics to a major criminal enterprise on landing. The authorities intercept them. Their son goes with CPS. He goes to a safe harbor for kids. The synopsis struck me as very close to home. Who wrote or directed the show was not listed, but it did state the air date. The month and year given matched the era when an identical set of circumstances had befallen me. The name of the center I went to was even called Safe Harbor. I was too young to remember much, but the facts were precise. I gulped and tried to shrug it off as an unusual coincidence. I read the second episode summary. Episode 2. We follow Joshua on his 15th birthday. He goes to a juvenile detention facility for the first time after he attacks a teacher by throwing a desk at him. Although he missed, the instructor still presses charges since he did not like the student much. He befriends a troublemaker on the inside named Ian. They escape, but not before a massive brawl with the other teens ensue inside of the facility. It ends with the two captured. I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. It was uncanny to me how similar the events were to my own experiences. A slight dizziness overtook me, but I went on to the third, unable to keep my eyes from skimming. Episode 3. Joshua is free. Joshua decides to break and enter an old man's upper-class home after scouting the place for days. His goal is to take the many Rolex watches from the top drawer of the old man's dresser. When he enters the house, Joshua discovers how the owner did not take his vacation cruise trip as planned. The man was asleep in his bedroom until Joshua wakes the victim by accident. Joshua runs away. He gets chased by the homeowner outside, where the elderly male dies of a heart attack in the street. I felt my chest tighten. It was all true, but I had never shared that story with anyone before. It was one of my most guilt-ridden memories. I read the next two. Episode 4. Joshua has nightmares of the old man crawling out of a ditch and choking him to death. He complains about night terrors to one of his counselors, who recommended a doctor. He ends up selling anti-anxiety pills after he does not like the way they make him feel. A girl he asks out overdoses and goes to the hospital. While she survives, he feels terrible, but not enough to stop dealing. He takes his earnings and buys a PC. He takes lessons on how to breach other people's privacy from a group of credit card thieves he met in a mall. Episode 5. Joshua discovers the dark web. He later reads headlines about some of his accomplices getting arrested. He still continues to engage in illicit activity. I looked at the air date for episode 6. It was the 24-hour period I was living through. Episode 6. Joshua goes into a bookstore to poach their internet and to try and make some money. He does not realize there is a man with a shaved head in a Carhartt t-shirt below him perusing the sci-fi aisle. The stranger is actually an undercover FBI agent. The government worker has a microphone and camera attached beneath his shirt. He is surveying for the perpetrator, even though he has not singled out who he is looking for yet. An arrest commences where they tackle, punch, and taser Joshua. They place him in handcuffs. My hands shook. I stood, gripped an Eckhart Tolle volume to appear less conspicuous, and opened it. I leaned my head over the railing to stare at the ground floor below me. A man who matched the description given by the article was there. His shirt was baggy and hid what I knew to be a gun on his hip. He held a paperback in his hands. I pulled out my phone. I pretended to have a conversation with an imaginary business associate about stocks. I folded the laptop with my free hand and went down the escalator. I strolled towards the back, where there were stacks of hardcover tomes on history. I found an unsecured door and walked through it. I was in the warehouse. Unopened boxes were stacked all around. I did not spot any workers and made a run for a rear entrance. I sprinted down a wide alleyway between the building and rows of motels. I passed an art gallery and liquor store before my heartbeat slowed. Along the way, I found a closed vegan restaurant called Belenti's Eatery. The place was black on the inside, but its neon sign still glowed. A picnic table sat on the lawn out front. I stationed myself there. I opened the laptop again and connected to their free Wi-Fi without issue. I scanned the rest of the chronology. The remaining episodes were all future time periods. I wiped perspiration away from my forehead as I read the rundown of the next episode. Episode 7, labeled A Darknet Market Operator in the Media, 3 of the 7 charges thrown at him lead to convictions. This includes conspiracy to traffic narcotics. He gets out early after he agrees to cooperate with different agencies. He becomes a consultant for cybersecurity awareness and a social engineering expert. Following a keynote speech given out of town, he comes home. His girlfriend Olivia and her family have been murdered. My eyes strained and I felt my breath grow shallower. Episode 8. Joshua navigates her house. The walls had dried blood. Every corner's DNA-lyzed. Olivia's throat is slit. Her body is over the couch in the living area. Her parents had socks stuffed in their mouths and deep stab wounds on their stomachs. Joshua calls the police. He's treated as the #1 suspect in the media for days on end. He is finally cleared, but the psychological damage is too much to bear. I pondered the words. Though I was still young, it is true that Liv meant everything to me. Episode 9. Joshua goes a psychiatric ward. He stares at the padded walls as though they will converse with him. Detectives do visit him with the hopes of gleaning some kind of further information. They tell him they know the aftermath of the massacre he stumbled upon was the work of an active serial killer. The murderer has remained unidentified. Episode 10. Joshua leaps out the window. He breaks his ankle. An adrenaline dump allows him to move across the field and onto the nearest highway. He goes out into traffic. A long haul truck careens around him and takes out a line of vehicles. He goes to the nearest lake, where he weighs his own pockets down with stones. He waits until nightfall and walks out into the abyss. The last image we see is his hand breaking the surface of the water. Starlight glints on his skin before his fingers submerge below the surface. His last few swallows of water create pockets of bubbles, which rise to the top. I absorbed what the rest of my existence would look like. 4 black SUVs pull up and circle around me in the parking lot. Men in black suits and the undercover agent from the bookstore ran at me. Even though I did not resist, they still threw me to the ground. They dislocated my shoulder and kicked me in the jaw a handful of times before they cuffed me. I did get time reduced in prison after I agreed to cooperate to catch people like me. After my release date, I have tried to revisit that link without luck. I fail to understand how that article existed in the first place. I have read how high-level stress can open up insights and portals into the unknown. I would bank on the latter, though sometimes I think it isn't for me to know. I do not want to give in to what destiny has written for me. My escape from the bookstore has given me confidence that I can change the outcome of the dark web's prophecy, even if only for a little while. Or did I only extend the inevitable for a fraction of time? Fate, especially in regards to our stories as individuals, is not written in stone. It is malleable, I tell myself. This positive thought is the only thing which keeps me going. I should visit Liv's house now. She has not answered my texts all morning. When my brother Noel went missing last year, the police were of little help. They told us not to worry, that it was far more difficult to disappear than it was made to look on TV or in the movies. Most people turn up on their own after a while, and their families find out, or pretend to find out, that the missing person's life was a little less respectable than they had claimed, a little bit darker and more mysterious. Some people live two lives, and nobody knows it but them. I did my own research and found this much was true. According to statistics, the chance of abduction by a stranger was less probable than being struck by lightning. You were much more likely to be kidnapped by someone you knew, and far more likely still to not be kidnapped at all. But despite their vague assurances and unfounded assumptions, Noel never did come back. The weeks and months went by, and there was no word. It seemed like the police had given up or forgotten about him. Digging through his belongings, I tried desperately to find something that would give a clue to his whereabouts. His computer was the best bet, I figured, since it was where he spent the majority of his time. Noel had worked as a database specialist for a big company named Proteon, and despite the fact that he had explained what he did to me a number of times, I never could properly figure it out. If people asked, I told them he was a computer programmer, since that was at least something most people could understand. He was an expert at assembling and troubleshooting computers, since my dad had owned a PC repair business when we were kids, and Noel had taken quickly to technology as a child. He was building machines for my dad's customers in his spare time when he was still in his teens. Later, he went to college for computer sciences and only become more proficient over the years. Lately, he'd been experimenting with app design in his spare time and had gotten pretty good at it. He had told me he was working on one app in particular that was extremely different from anything else on the market. I had hoped the other programmer he had been working with would know something, but I tracked him down and that resulted in a dead end as well. Upon meeting the guy, I found he was a peculiar, disheveled-looking Satanist who refused to make eye contact with me and offered no useful information. He told me Noel had been of great help in his project, but said the rest was top secret. I went home defeated once again. Noel's old computer was set up on my desk, so I turned it on and sat down, resolved to do some more digging. I logged into his email. Luckily, Google had saved all his passwords, so I didn't need to try to figure them out through impossible guesswork. Searching through his old emails, I had found a lot of junk mail. There was correspondence with work and family and a few with friends, but nothing that gave any clue as to where he might be. If anything, they painted the picture of someone living an ordinary life, making plans for the future, with no indication of wanting to disappear. His phone had been left behind too, and I went through that as well, looking for anything strange that stood out. But there was nothing. I sat there at my desk with the mouse in my hand for days, and then weeks, looking for something, anything of use. I pored through his dock. Files and JPEGs, MP4s and MP3s, PDFs and every other damn file type you can imagine, examining everything, desperately searching for some hint, some clue. Everything turned out to be a dead end. Of course, I called the police frequently as well, but they were of no help and eventually went so far as to tell me to stop calling, saying they would update me if they found anything. I had cursed at them furiously and hung up, and that had been the end of that. I went back on his computer one night to dig through some more file folders, and I noticed something that my eyes had scanned over in the past. An icon in the sea of icons that lived on the busy and disorganized desktop. It looked a bit like a purple onion with a slice cut out of it. I clicked on it. A dialog box with a loading bar appeared briefly. Then a purple window opened up that looked like a web browser. I realized that was exactly what it was. Tor browser. It said at the top. I knew little about these things, but understood that this was an untraceable way to use the internet, since it encrypted everything being done online. Thinking back, I remembered Noel talking about using Tor. He said it was much safer and couldn't be traced. But why would he care about being traced? I had thought at the time, maybe there was a good reason after all. Suddenly, my cell phone chimed and I went over to it quickly and looked at the message. It was a URL. Another text came through. This one was a typed message from someone. Enter the URL on Tor. Another ding. Another message. Tell no one about this. If you contact anybody, I'm gone. I'm your only chance at finding him. I looked at Noel's computer. That was when I noticed the little lens at the top of his monitor that was the built-in webcam. The red light was on next to it, indicating it was recording. Someone was watching me, and they could see what I was doing on the computer as well. I was sure of it. I texted back, doing it now, after typing in the URL exactly as instructed. The screen turned into a login for a website of some kind. I received another text. Password is his favorite movie. You have 2 minutes. I didn't need 2 minutes for that at least, since I knew it was Fight Club, as it had been since that movie had been released. My hands were shaking as I typed the password into the box. I was beginning to feel very concerned, but also a bit hopeful at this sudden turn of events. A chat window opened up, and a message promptly appeared from someone named Shadowcat. Shadowcat. You're his brother, I take it? I typed back a response quickly, afraid of losing whoever this was. It felt like they could disappear at any second, back into the ether, and I would never find them again. Mark. Yes. Do you know where he is? Shadowcat. Yes. I was a little confused as to why my name was appearing in the chat window as Mark, since that wasn't my name and I had never entered any identifiers. Was that an alias that Noel used online, I wondered? Mark. Is he okay? I took a deep breath, waiting for the answer. Shadowcat. More or less. Mark. What do you want? Shadowcat. You'll find out soon enough. Another message came through, showing another URL. Shadowcat. Keep chat open. Create a new window and go to the URL. Mark. Okay. I typed in the URL and found myself at another website. It was a bit like eBay, except instead of selling old records and jewelry, people were selling guns, explosives, and some very disturbing categories of pornography. Mark. What the hell is this? Shadowcat. Never mind your questions for now. Do what I say, or he dies. Suddenly, an image appeared, replacing the chat window. It showed my brother Noel chained to a wall in a stress position. He was blindfolded and gagged, but I could hear his muffled screams for help. My hands were shaking nearly uncontrollably now, and I had to type and retype my reply several times before it made any sense. Mark, how do I know you'll give him back? Shadowcat, trust me or don't, the choice is yours. If you refuse, he dies. If you do what I say, I will give him back to you unharmed. It seemed there was no other option. I felt trapped and hopeless, depressed in the horrible situation I had found myself in. If I called the police, he would see me do it on the webcam. If I said no, he would kill Noel. Shadowcat, you have 10 seconds to decide. A countdown began on the screen. Shadowcat 10, Shadowcat 9, Shadowcat 8, Shadowcat 7, Shadowcat 6, Shadowcat 5, Shadowcat 4. Mark, okay. Shadowcat, good. Here is your shopping list. Get everything on it. A long list of items was included next, and my eyes widened further as I read through it. Mark, what the hell is all this for? What are you planning to do? The chat window closed suddenly. I was left alone in my living room, my heart beating fast and hard in my chest. Only the other website remained now, the one with black market guns and explosives and everything else illegal that you could have delivered to your doorstep. I debated calling the police again, telling them these new developments, or even going to the police station. But what if the kidnapper found out? He obviously had ways to spy on me. Probably you'll say I'm an idiot for what I did next, but I really wanted to get my brother back. So I filled the online shopping cart with the requested illicit items and entered my credit card information, cringing as I hit enter. I guessed I would have to cancel my credit card, since I didn't trust the vendors one bit, but at least that part was done. The package arrived in the mail surprisingly quickly. As soon as I had brought it inside, I got another text message. It invited me to another chat on Tor, where I was given a physical address. They said to meet them there with the package, and they would give me back my brother. I was to tell no one where I was going. It was dark by the time I arrived at the old warehouse in the industrial section of town. The place was abandoned, and there were no lights to illuminate the parking lot as I pulled in. My trunk had some cargo in it that would surely get me a couple decades in prison, if not more. Terrified, I sat in my car, still gripping the steering wheel tightly with both hands despite the car being turned off. I had no idea what was going to happen next. My cell phone chimed, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was a text message. Come inside through the east door. I did a bit of quick geography to determine which way I was facing and decided that was the door I was looking at right in front of me. Taking a deep breath, I got out of the car. I popped the trunk and grabbed the duffel bag I had brought with the illicit items packed inside. The gravel crunched beneath my feet as I made my way across the parking lot. My hand shook as I reached out and grasped the doorknob, turned it, and went into the dark, cavernous space inside the warehouse. As difficult as it was to see outside, it was even darker in there. Taking a few more frightened steps forward, I found my eyes did not adjust to the darkness. The door clanged shut behind me, and I jumped, feeling my heart skip a beat. "Hello?" My voice echoed back at me. "Did you bring everything?" I jumped, startled, when I heard the voice. It was raspy and high-pitched, and made the hair stand up on the back of my neck at the sound of it, like fingernails across a chalkboard. Yes. Good, bring it this way." Terrified, I stepped forward into the pitch blackness, unsure if I would run into something. I moved slowly and deliberately, hoping not to hurt myself. He's got it for us. He has it all. Yes. Suddenly, I realized there was not just one voice speaking, but many. They were all around me, surrounding me in the darkness. I felt their movements in the air around me and heard sounds like the wind blowing during a thunderstorm. Poisons, acids, knives. "Explosives," boomed a voice from the corner. "Guns and bullets and snake venom." I heard them moving closer now, inching towards me. Their voices were in my ears as I backed away. "Where is my brother? Show him to me, or you get nothing." I was terrified, but determined to get Noel back, come hell or high water. "Or maybe we'll keep you as well, little brother. Maybe someone will want you back badly enough to bring us more offerings, more dark treasures." I could feel them very close now, could hear their breathing and feel their proximity to me, causing my skin to break out in goosebumps. My mind raced, desperate to think of what I could do to get out. These creatures, these demons, whatever they were, had no intention of letting me leave. I had a sudden brainstorm. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone. Quickly, I hit the button for the flashlight function. If there was anything these creatures would be affected by, I guessed by their choice of habitat, it would be light. "These are demons born of darkness," my lizard brain whispered. "They are not accustomed to anything but blackness." The white light cut through the darkness like a knife. I heard screams and saw a brief haze of smoke appear. Around the edges of the light, I caught glimpses of vague forms and humanoid shapes. They recoiled from the light, and I felt and heard them moving towards me from behind. Spinning, I cast the light just in time to see one of the demons nearly face to face with me. His form was massive and bear-like, huge fangs and long sharp talons raised in the air, ready to slit my throat. His red flesh bubbled and burst open. He evaporated into a misty haze when the light hit him, screaming in a deafening baritone, "Arg!" Realizing that the light had the power to destroy them now, or at least to send them back to hell where they came from, I spun round and round with the light, trying to incinerate them all. I saw some flying bat-like away. Others jumped up to the high ceiling and hid in the girders and beams above. I saw something at the other end of the huge space, and I shone my light that direction. It was Noel. He was shackled to a wall on the far side of the warehouse. He was gagged and blindfolded, unmoving. I saw dark shadows around him, moving quickly, and realized it was more of the demons guarding him. Running over towards him, I heard the sounds of more of them chasing after me, racing like monkeys across the steel beams above, matching my speed. I blasted the demons with bright light from my phone as I got closer to him. Their shadow skin began to sizzle and burst into flame, and they howled like banshees and moved away. There was no key for the chains holding him, but I was prepared. I grabbed the bolt cutters from my bag, a last-second impulse buy from my trip to the hardware store. Part of me had worried that the people I was dealing with would not let him free willingly. I had wanted any advantage I could get. The bolt cutters went through the chains with an effort, and the one holding his wrist snapped with a satisfying noise, and his arm fell down limply to his side. Before I could think too much about what that meant, I spun around at the sudden sound of movement behind me. I screamed as the claws of something terrible raked across my back. The demon disappeared back into the shadows above us, leaping into the air like a bat, and I saw flapping wings as it went back up into the rafters. I pulled the blindfold and gag from Noel's face and saw he was barely conscious. It felt terrible to do it, but I slapped him hard across the face to try and get him to wake up. He groaned and stirred but didn't open his eyes. I felt a sharp pain in my neck suddenly like knives there, and I spun around quickly again to try and catch it in the light. There was a hint of smoke as my flashlight caught the edge of it, but it was too fast and quickly disappeared again. I was suddenly feeling frantic and terrified for my life. They were becoming more bold. My hand stung after the next hard slap to Noel's face, but it accomplished what I needed. He woke up and spit blood from his mouth. Ow, what the hell? Noel, wake up! You need to hold this light. Move it around. Keep them away. It took him a few seconds to understand, but I thrust the phone into his hand anyways and began to work on the other chain holding his right wrist. His eyes were wide with fear, and his gaze darted around the room as I continued working on the chains. The one holding his other wrist snapped with an effort, and I got down on the floor to work on the shackles attached to his ankles. He was moving the flashlight around frantically, but it seemed to be working. Warm blood trickled down my neck and my back from my injuries, and I felt it turn cold on my skin. "How the hell did you wind up here?" I asked, once he was finally freed from the chains. "That damned Satanist programmer. He summoned those things from hell." "What? How?" "Never mind. Just, let's get out of here." I took the flashlight back from him and used it as a weapon, shining it every direction and often just in time as I saw the demons scatter from the light like cockroaches each time I swung it around. Once we reached the door, I threw it open to reveal the parking lot, and we ran from there as fast as we could back to the car. We had escaped, or so we thought. I wish I could say that everything is better now, that we fled from the demons in that warehouse and never saw them again. But those unnatural creatures knew no boundaries. They were not inclined to stay contained within the walls of that warehouse. And they were not pleased that we had escaped with their treasures, which I promptly dumped off at the police station. Anonymously, of course. Although I got my brother back, neither one of us will ever feel safe again. The lights in my home stay on all hours of the day and night now. Noel is the same way. I sleep during the day and surround myself with lights at night, terrified until the sun comes up again. What am I afraid of, you ask? A blackout, a blown fuse, a burnt-out light bulb. And they happen more and more lately. Always, I see them in the shadows, waiting, watching, patient, for their chance. There hadn't been a murder in Franzburg for over 5 years. Not since Old Man Weathers killed his wife over a Monopoly match gone sour and a marriage gone even sourer. Up until last week, that was. Now I've got 3 different files sitting on my desk with 3 different victims. They stare up at me accusingly, saying, "Solve us." I pull out my bottle of Glenfiddich from the bottom drawer and find a halfway clean glass, blowing in it to get rid of any dead spiders or mouse turds. I fill it up a third of the way, then decide to hell with it and make it a double. The strong smell of it wakes my senses and burns my tongue a little at first, but in a good, familiar sort of way. I admire the brown liquid in the glass for a minute and then open one of the folders and begin to leaf through it for the umpteenth time. Each murder was spaced a couple days apart, and the killer managed to sneak in and out of the victims' homes undetected. All 3 had their throats slit with a very sharp blade and were hung upside down in their respective residences. Their wrists and ankles were tied with thick, coarse rope. They had been left like that for hours, as if someone had been waiting for the blood to drain out. Like cattle or pigs, but nobody knows where the blood went. How the hell does something like that happen in my little town? Something flares up in me momentarily and I realize it's wounded pride. Someone has been in my town and has been killing my people. Under my nose and without leaving a trace of evidence. Maybe you just can't find the evidence because you're an amateur. A hack, probably. I questioned a lot of people, as one does. Started with those closest to the victims and worked my way outward, trying to make connections. But murder isn't something I have a lot of experience with. Liars, though. Liars I can tell from a mile away. When you've been a cop long enough, you can pick them out easy enough. It's an acquired skill. The victims were young, in their 20s. People kill people they know. So, who knew all 3 victims? Who had a motive to kill them? And how did they do it without getting caught? The first question requires some digging. It means interviews with people who don't want to talk. I visit each victim's closest friends and family members. I find out that the 3 were all loners, with very few friends, at least not in real life. Not only that, but they knew each other. My suspicion that the murders are connected becomes a certainty. I look deeper into their lives, sussing out any details I can find. They were all gamers. Professional ones, apparently. Not something I had thought possible. To my surprise, when I ask about the details, the answer is always the same. Each victim was obsessed with a computer game called League of Legends. More questions lead to more answers, and eventually, after a lot of puzzle pieces coming together, I figure out how the victims were all connected. It turns out they were all in a clan together, which means they played the game together as a team. Teams in League of Legends are made up of 5 members, so that leaves 2 more people out there who are either potential victims or potential murderers. I have to find the other members of the clan. The 2 are like missing pieces from a jigsaw puzzle, and without them, I can't see the whole picture. So I track them down. Sarah Green is the first. She seems pleasant enough. After inviting me inside for coffee, we talk for almost an hour, and she responds candidly and with concern for her deceased friends, but gives no useful information. "Can I get you another refill, detective?" she asks after I drain my second cup of coffee. No, that's all right. I think I've imposed on you long enough. She walks me to the door after that and says she hopes I will be able to find some answers. I thank her, still unsure what to make of her, and move on to the next interview. Terry Wentworth is a chubby man with a ponytail and thick glasses. He has a patchy goatee, which attempts unsuccessfully to hide a double chin, with an unfortunate butt-looking cleft running down the center of it. I find myself trying not to look at it, as if to do so would be rude. "What can I do for you, officer?" he asks, looking annoyed. "I understand you played a game with these people," I say, showing him pictures of the victims. He cringes slightly. "A computer game called League of Legends, is that correct?" Yeah, so what? I played with them." Something is off already. I can tell he is more nervous, more defensive than he needs to be. But then again, some people have bad social anxiety. Maybe he is just an anxious type. "Any infighting in the clan, Terry? Problems between members?" Nope. No, I don't think so. His palms are sweating heavily, and he wipes them on his pants, leaving huge damp spots on his upper thighs. I decide to take him down to the station, make him sweat a bit more. It works. After an afternoon in the hot box, the bastard starts talking. "Sarah, it was all her idea. I didn't even do it. It was her." This is after hours of coaxing and threatening. His shirt now completely drenched in sweat, his hair dripping like he has just stepped out of the shower. I mentioned Sarah again, saying that he was probably going to kill her next, and the guy finally cracks and turns on her. "I just found out about it and I couldn't stop her. It was already too late, everything had already—" "Slow down. Take a deep breath. Just calm down for a second and tell me what happened. You said it was her? She killed them." He takes a deep, trembling breath and goes on. "No, she wasn't capable of that, neither was I. But we weren't going to make it anywhere in the tournaments unless she could bring on a couple new pros. Real talent, I mean, not just friends who happened to play. The two of us were top-notch, but we couldn't carry the clan anymore. We kept getting knocked out early in the big tournaments." "You mean you had them killed over a video game?" "It's not just a game. There's thousands of dollars up for grabs, man. You've got no idea. Millions if you're world class. And we could have been, if not for them. But like I said, it wasn't my idea. She set it all up. I didn't find out until later, when I asked her." "Asked her what?" "Where the hell everybody was. They all just started disappearing and new players started showing up to practice. First it was Lisa, then Graham went permanently AFK. Finally, she told me Wayne wasn't cutting it either, that he'd have to disappear next." "So, what did you say?" "I pretended to go along with it. That's what I do sometimes if I want to find out how far gone somebody is. I don't know if you've ever tried it, but if you ever start talking to somebody and they say something really rotten, just agree with them for a minute and see what sort of depravity their mind really contains. It's kind of astonishing." It's called Police Work 101, kid, I want to say, but don't. "All right, I'll buy it. So you tell her you love whatever she's doing to clean up the team. You just want in on it. You're curious and want to help. So she tells you?" "Damn right she does. Like she's proud of herself. She found an assassin on the dark web, she tells me. Some guy who'll do it practically for free." "You have his name? A way to contact him?" I try hard not to show my hand, but I'm getting excited at the prospect of catching this guy, and my questions come a little too fast, making him bristle momentarily. "Man, I can't tell you that. If she finds out I said anything, she's coming after me next." "Listen, kid," I say in my best friendly cop impersonation. "You're doing the right thing here. Let me follow up on this and I'll make sure she goes away for a long time, for the rest of her life. You didn't do anything you say, right? So you've got nothing to worry about. But you have to tell me the truth. Everything. Now, who is this guy?" He looks at me darkly and seems to brood on the question for a while. But eventually he answers. He explains to me how to reach the assassin and how it was all arranged. Sarah is sitting in front of the computer screen with a sad look on her face. He's going to kill all of us. "Who is Sarah?" She looks at the blank screen, dark, empty. "Him." A shiver runs down my spine and my flesh breaks out in goose pimples. "We can protect you from him," I say, but the promise rings hollow, my voice empty and false even to my own ears. "No, you can't." She sighs and turns the computer on, waits for it to boot up. Within a few minutes, she is logged onto the Tor browser and is into some chat room. She types something into the window and waits. I hold my breath without meaning to. Suddenly, the screen goes completely dark. The chat window disappears. Despite the heat of the day, it feels cold in the room, then freezing. I exhale and can see my breath hang in the air. My teeth begin to clack together and chatter. "Who is he?" The voice is like a thunder crash coming from the computer, and I understand immediately why she was so scared. It is a wonder the speakers don't blow out. My ears are ringing and I feel like the room is still echoing and reverberating with the sound of it. There is a presence watching us. I can feel it. I don't know how else to explain it, but it feels like when you are walking down the street and you sense someone watching you from behind. Have you ever felt that? Like eyes are tickling your neck, and you turn and see that of course there is someone staring at you from the front window of their house. I feel that now, but all over, like there are eyes in the walls, ceiling, and floors all watching me. My skin tingles and I shiver. "That's Detective Slate," she says in a monotone, betraying me immediately. "He wants to catch you." I told him that's silly, but he doesn't listen. The young woman's face is visible in the reflection of the monitor, and I see her eyes staring far off into the distance, as if she is hypnotized. Then, that deep voice begins to speak again, and I find myself unable to do anything but listen. "Look into the darkness, Detective Slate. Don't you want to experience it for yourself? Don't you want to sleep, Detective? Aren't you tired?" Suddenly, out of nowhere, there are 5 men grabbing me and wrestling me to the floor. My heart is beating out of my chest, and I am stunned to see that my service revolver is in my hand, clenched tight in my fist. Yet, I have no memory of removing it from its holster. The coldness of the barrel touches my temple, and my fingers on the trigger, trying desperately to pull it, despite my terrified brain pleading for it to listen, to stop, to relax. I don't want to die. I don't want to die. And yet my index finger continues to squeeze down on the trigger as if possessed. My old partner, Steve, who has gotten there first, is wrestling with me desperately, and finally manages to pry my hand from the gun. Later, I try to explain to them that it wasn't me. I didn't want to do it. Something made me do it. He made me do it. I look up and see Sarah is now banging her head down hard against the steel table, as if she has no control over herself. She brings her face down again and again, and blood begins to spatter and spray. Parts of her face shear off, exposing muscle and bone beneath, and still she doesn't stop. Her teeth break and chipped pieces fly and scatter everywhere. "What the hell?" another officer is saying, letting go of me and rushing over to her. Then he makes the mistake of looking at the screen as well. In a rapid motion, too quickly for anyone to stop him, he pulls his pistol from the holster, cocks it, and holds the gun up to his temple. The blast is deafening in the small cement-walled room. It echoes, piercing my ears and turning them deaf for a while, then making them ring. I feel like needles are stabbing into my eardrums and I clap my hands over them protectively. But then my eyes betray me, and I find my gaze drifting back to the beckoning blackness of the computer screen, as if a siren song for that sense is calling me to stare at the darkness of that empty black rectangle. One very savvy officer who has been watching everything with wide eyes from the doorway runs in. He was not at an angle where he could see the screen and seems unaffected by it. He slams the laptop shut and then picks it up and throws it hard to the floor where it breaks to pieces. Then he brings his foot down on it, hard. He crunches it beneath his polished black shoe and looks up at us with a sweating, anxious face. "I'm sorry, boss," he says to me, looking worried for his job. On an ordinary day, he would have every right to be, but today is no ordinary day. I had to. Don't apologize. You just saved all of our lives. Thank you. We look around the room and take in the bloodbath which surrounds us. One officer dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. A suspect/witness dead while in our custody from repeated blunt force injuries to her face, also self-inflicted. Officers begin to crowd the room from the pit where they were stationed at their desks when the gunshot went off. People are asking 1,000 questions, and I don't know what to tell them, or what I even believe myself. The captain sends me home without pay, pending an investigation. It doesn't matter how many people vouch for me, how many saw the madness for themselves. It matters how it all looks. And there's no explaining what happened to a rational person. Even I can hardly believe it, and I witnessed it myself. I tried to catch a dark web hired assassin and discovered that he was no ordinary hired gun. No simple mercenary. The thing Sarah hired to kill her fellow clan members was something else. Something we as humans don't have a word for yet or any understanding of. Something that is spilling over into our world from another and feeds on our flesh and blood. Somehow, I have to stop him. I work for NASA as an astronomer, and there are certain things we keep hidden from the public. No, the Earth isn't flat, and aliens don't control the government. Folk, I wish those were the case, as the truth is much, much worse. In 1993, the Hubble Space Telescope saw a star disappear. It didn't go supernova or die naturally, it simply went dark over the span of a few minutes. This star was already too faint to see with the naked eye, and ground-based telescopes had trouble picking it out from among the surrounding stars, so the event wasn't widely known to the public. At the time, we thought the most likely explanation was that a cloud of interstellar dust had drifted between Earth and the star, occluding it from view. It was noted and mostly forgotten about. In 2007, 2 more stars vanished. Due to the circumstances of this event, this was much more concerning. The 2 stars in question were part of a binary system, orbiting each other at a fairly close distance. If a cloud of interstellar dust was the culprit again, they would have both seemed to disappear simultaneously or very close to it. Instead, both stars faded individually over a period of minutes, separated by a span of about 8 hours. This binary system was also about 15 light-years closer to Earth than the star that had previously disappeared in 1993. After carefully reviewing millions of Hubble images, 2 more stars were identified which had gone out in the years 1995 and 2002. These were all in the same stellar neighborhood, only a handful of light-years from each other. The only conclusion we could draw was that some unknown influence, traveling close to the speed of light, was shrouding or destroying these stars. Unfortunately, the Hubble wasn't sensitive enough to tell us any more than that. The James Webb Space Telescope first came online a few months ago. Although official channels will tell you that it's still undergoing testing, we have been actively collecting data since early February. One of the first things we did was to aim the telescope at the regions of space occupied by the vanished stars. If they were being blocked by dust clouds, a hope some of us still held on to, the increased sensitivity of the JWST may have been able to see through them and confirm that the stars were still there. Unfortunately, we had no such luck. The first 3 stars that had disappeared were still completely dark. Gravitational wave detectors, though, soon found something odd. In all cases, not only were the stellar masses still present, but the amount of mass had actually increased. More sensitive observations had also detected a type of string, or web, stretching through space connecting these now invisible stars. When we trained the telescope on the binary system that had vanished in 2007, which was the nearest point at which this phenomenon had so far been observed, there was finally enough ambient EM spectrum radiation left to try a mass spectrometer reading. If you're not aware, mass spectrometry is an incredibly useful process, whereby measuring the patterns of light wavelengths emitted or reflected by an object, we can learn tons of useful information, such as its temperature, speed, and direction of movement, and chemical composition. The readings we got from the binary stars didn't make any sense, though. First of all, they were cold, almost as cold as the surrounding interstellar medium. Whatever had happened to these stars had snuffed them out completely, or somehow prevented their light from escaping. What was truly puzzling, however, were the emission lines returned by the mass spectrometer. Several familiar elements such as hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and magnesium were identified, but these were few and far between. Most of the readings didn't correspond to any known chemical elements, and even seemed to defy what we knew about the physics of light, matter, and chemistry. This massive, star-spanning structure was primarily composed of materials that we didn't even have names for, and may not even have been matter as we understand it. Speculation ran rampant. Obviously, such a thing couldn't be a natural phenomenon. Finally, we had proof of extraterrestrial life. But what was this thing we had discovered, and for what purpose was it being built? The leading hypothesis was that we were looking at a series of Dyson shells, massive solar collectors built to completely envelop stars in order to capture 100% of their energy output. Such a concept had been envisioned in the early 20th century as a potential source of energy for an interstellar civilization. Ever since then, the idea had found its way into popular science fiction. The construction of these massive structures had actually been theorized to be one of the first signs of intelligent extraterrestrial life that we may someday detect. It seemed that day was today. The theory still didn't explain everything, though. First of all, there was the impossible speed with which the stars were covered. Constructing a Dyson shell from scratch in a matter of minutes was beyond even the wildest speculations of scientists and sci-fi writers. Then, there were the mysterious filaments that connected the shells over distances of light years. No one had any idea what purpose these could serve, or how they could even be built. Everyone at NASA was fascinated by this mystery. In hindsight, we may have been better off if we had never discovered the truth. Less than a month ago, the JWST detected a series of unusual energy bursts emanating from interstellar space. These were occurring at the very edge of a star system approximately 12 light-years from the binary system that vanished in 2007. As we focused the telescope on this system, we soon determined that these were not natural phenomena either. The energy signatures, which were still flashing intermittently, matched what would be expected from thermonuclear and antimatter based explosions, along with several other types of energies that we couldn't identify. These explosions, although still not visible to the naked eye on Earth from that distance, were absolutely tremendous in magnitude, easily billions of times more powerful than any nuke that humanity could conceivably build. After experimenting with the telescope's settings, we were able to get a clearer picture of what was going on. The tip of one of the interstellar filaments that linked the Dyson system was passing through the Oort cloud of the distant star system, approaching its sun, and whoever lived there was fighting back. Their weapons were able to slow the thing's advance, shattering, breaking off, and vaporizing planet-sized chunks of the object. But it seemed to be rebuilding itself almost as fast as it was being destroyed. After less than a week, the explosions stopped. It seems that they had run out of ammunition. In the void between stars, we knew that these things traveled at nearly the speed of light. But as we watched it approach the inner star system, its pace slowed as it swelled in size, preparing to devour the system's star. We quickly trained the telescope's mirrors on the doomed sun. We were about to watch whatever this thing was blot out another star, but in real time. We all held our breath as we watched the projected image of the main sequence star, slightly larger than our own sun. At first, nothing seemed to be happening, but soon a small shadow appeared on the edge of the luminous orb, soon followed by another shadow, and then a third. The shadows began to converge, forming a strange yet somehow familiar pattern as they blocked out the star's light. "What are those?" One of my colleagues gasped. "They almost look like—" She paused, as if afraid to say the next word for fear of a ridicule. I, however, had no such hesitancy. "Leaves," I said, my voice monotone. The situation was far too incredible to express any emotional reaction, even that of pure shock. "They look like leaves." We watched as, over a period of minutes, a web of shadowy outlines, matching the familiar shapes of oblong leaves and thin vines, proceeded to blot out the remaining light from the distant star. By that point, everyone in the room had realized the truth. The phenomenon we had been tracking for so many years wasn't some hyper-advanced alien megastructure. Hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and magnesium, some of the few familiar elements we had detected, they were all components of chlorophyll. It was a plant, an enormous plant that spanned across light years. And, much like terrestrial plants, it sought out light to fuel itself. The filaments connecting the stars across interstellar space were stems, branches. It would grow in the direction of the nearest stars it sensed, completely enveloping them and then moving on. Any life inhabiting planets orbiting those stars would be left to freeze to death. Or perhaps even worse, it was possible that the plant would devour those planets to add to its mass as well. Everyone was silent as the telescope continued to gather data. Eventually, after what seemed like an eternity, a young astronomer spoke up from the far end of the room, addressing our supervisor. "Sir, we've begun to detect the formation of another tendril leaving the system. Its vector is—" He gulped. He didn't need to say any more, but he did anyway. "It's heading directly for our sun." "How much time do we have?" the supervisor replied grimly. "Judging by the time lag, distance, relativistic properties, and previously observed speeds of this thing, I'd estimate no more than 27 years, sir." 27 years. We had just watched this galactic weed overwhelm a civilization that was, at the very least, thousands of years ahead of us technologically, and we had less than 3 decades. I'll probably be found and silenced for posting this. But I don't care. I have to tell someone. I can't keep this a secret any longer. When the sun turns black and the world begins to freeze, at least you'll have some idea of what's going on. Small comfort it may be.